is Kyle Hunter and Elijah Fleming with Don't Mean Nothin. We're here with Clay Novak. Clay is an Army veteran over 20 years and an author. We're looking forward to hearing your story, and we appreciate you having us over.
I appreciate the invitation to be on. I think veteran stories and veterans telling their stories is important. I think it's important to America, but we can't let these things. We were at war for 20 years. We can't let these things fly off into the ether and be forgotten. It's important.
Absolutely. So let's start with early childhood, Clay. Bring us back to where you grew up. And
yeah, so I'm a Chicago area kid. Chicago people get a little defensive when you say you're from Chicago, but you're not actually from Chicago. So I'm a Chicago area kid. I grew up in the suburbs. I grew up in a very blue collar family. I have my parents, older sister, younger sister, and grew up Chicago suburbs. My dad is a union sheet metal guy. Now he's retired. But my grandfather was also union sheet metal. And his father opened a roofing business back when it was metal roofing. And that turned into a sheet metal business that my grandfather took over. And then my dad worked into the trade as well. So had I gone that route, which it was very prescribed to me that I wouldn't, I would have been fourth generation sheet metal guy. And so my dad served between 66 and 70 in the Air Force. So Vietnam era, did not go to Vietnam, luckily. Met my mom. They're 4 years apart. They got married right after she graduated high school. He got out of the Air Force at 22. She graduated high school. 18, they got married. And they've been together ever since. So, you've got, truthfully a rare story with them, which is amazing. They've been married since 1970. So, yeah, so 56 years they've been together. And raised three kids, and three kids who looked at service in a very interesting way. My older sister is a education administrator, was a teacher for a number of years, and now she's a principal in a K-3 school. My little sister is also a teacher. She's a reading specialist. And so, you've got the two of them who have been in education, and then I obviously was in the military for a very long time. So, my parents raised three kids who, give back. That was kind of, where we all ended up. Whether that was purposeful or not, I don't know. But it is kind of how it ended up. But, we grew up in, I'm a Gen X guy, and my sisters are as well. So we had that great Gen X childhood. My parents both worked. My dad obviously was, working in the trades. My mom was very entrepreneurial in the sense that she had some skills. She could sew, which she turned into a seamstress business, which at first was out of the house, and then eventually she put into a shop. So she opened her own business, ran that for a number of years, and then, got tired of that and decided to change course, change direction. And so she did a couple of things, and it really was all self-taught. She, worked for a couple of businesses, did some clerical work, and then did some bookkeeping. And then eventually, before she retired, she worked for a heavy equipment company, but she ran their education program, their entire education program. So it was a company that was focused on making sure we teach kids how to be heavy equipment operators and repairers, right? Because we need those kinds of people to continue to build America. But she ran their education program. I had two parents who had a very deep work ethic. And I know that rubbed off on both me and my sisters. At the same time, when my parents grew up, Catholic education was the pinnacle, right? That was the best education you could get. When I was a kid, they put us, all three of us, in a Catholic school. So I spent 8 years, first through eighth grade in a Catholic school, which at the time and in the location wasn't a bad education, but it wasn't the same thing as when my parents were kids, right? Public school education was comparable, if not better, than the Catholic education. And then I moved on to public high school. And I went to a very large, very college preparatory high school. Hinsdale Central is and I didn't even realize it until I got a little older, and even while I was in the Army, I would tell people that I went to Hinsdale Central High School outside of Chicago, and people knew about that high school. And the academic reputation of that school carries. And it was something I was never aware of until I was away from it. But as a kid, I was an athlete, played soccer my entire life. In fact, I'm 52 now, and I just quit playing competitively 2 years ago. I grew up playing soccer my whole life. Dabbled a little bit of basketball as a junior high kid because it was the only thing at the Catholic school to play. I ran track in high school to stay in shape for soccer. I didn't run track because I liked running track. I just knew I ended up being pretty good at it. And I ran a grueling 400-meter event, which if anybody's ever run track, 400 meters is a painful event. But that's what I ran for 4 years. But I was first and foremost a soccer player, and that was my love as an athlete. I also grew up shooting, something that my family does. And when I say my family, I'm talking family at large. I talked about my grandfather. My great-grandfather was a hunter. My grandfather was a hunter and a target shooter. My dad was a hunter is a hunter and a target shooter. And that got passed on. But it's not just them. My dad's youngest sister was a target shooter for a long time. My mom shot targets for a while. My older sister shot targets. I shoot, my kids shoot. And so I grew up shooting clay targets, trap and skeet and sporting clays, recreationally, and even a little competitively, and then did a lot of bird hunting as a kid, and then into adulthood. So, the family was what it was. Again, we had that great Gen X kind of upbringing. I spent a lot of time, because both my parents were working. I spent a lot of time unsupervised. And we had a lot of freedom back then. It's not that, and times obviously were very different. I actually, in one of my earliest interviews after I became an author, I used the word latchkey kid. And my mom got very upset because to her, a latchkey kid was a kid who was unsupervised because of lack of parenting, which is far from the truth with me and my sisters. But we were the kids in the summertime, where mom would be like, hey, here's the chores that got to be done. I don't care when they get done, but they're going to be done by the time I get home, right? And so we were left to our devices, to get things done. We were given a lot of responsibility at an early age, but we were given a lot of freedom at an early age as well. And I found my way, into a fun, teenage years. I did all the things that the Gen X kids did. I drank when I was young. I went to high school parties when I was young. My best friend lived closer to the city of Chicago. I used to hop on a commuter train, as a mid-teenager, 14, 15, 16 years old. I would hop on a train and I would meet him and we would go roam around the city of Chicago. And that was not uncommon. That was kind of the norm. And so was the high school party thing. We did that. It was normal and we enjoyed it. And it was a great teenage childhood. I wouldn't trade any of it. But very formative for all of us, in the Gen X years. You can see it now on social media. Gen X has its own thing. And I'm very much part of that thing. The music, the unsupervised or the teenage years where we had a lot of freedom to go and do things and sneaking out at night and going to parties and, having girlfriends and boyfriends, all that stuff. That was definitely my childhood, my teenage years. And I loved it. It was fantastic.
No cell phones.
No cell phones.
Totally different world.
Right? And so what I didn't do, truthfully, was I didn't study. I was not a great student. And so I used to get, when report cards would come out, I did well enough to keep myself academically eligible for athletics. That's really all I cared about. As long as I could keep playing sports, whether it was playing soccer, running track, but mostly playing soccer, that was really all I was concerned about. I wasn't looking forward to GPA to get into college, to those kinds of things. I was having a good time. I was going out with my buddies. I was chasing after girls. I was going to parties. I was playing soccer, running track. School was kind of a vehicle for that, but I didn't really care that much about school. So I was not a good student. And as much as I wanted to, pursue a lot of things in life, I really didn't want to go to college. But I was told I had to go to college.
Yeah.
I was not given an option.
I was going to say, I have a blue collar family as well. My mom and dad were super strict on that, just trying to get me to go to school because
Yep.
they didn't go, right? So.
Yeah, and that's my parents as well. So I used to get this speech from my dad when report cards would come out, and there was always a D in there or maybe two. I never failed anything in high school, but I ran the razor's edge on a lot of it. And my dad, he had those permanently dirty hands. You know what I mean? Like he's that guy. That was his line of work. And he always used to tell me, you don't want to come home like this every day. Like, I want better for you. I want you to go somewhere where you don't have to come home dirty and exhausted. And he wasn't ashamed of what he did, but everybody wants better for their kids. But that was what I got, from my parents, specifically my dad. And I'm sure, he gave me that speech more times than either one of us would care to recall, but it's a fact. It's what happened. I grew up, like I said, my dad was in the Air Force from 66 to 70.
Was he drafted?
No, he wasn't. So he had a decently low draft number and decided to enlist instead.
Really?
Yep. So, and assuming risk. Now, he enlisted for 4 years, and he enlisted for the Air Force. The most people don't realize this. The busiest airport in the world in the late 60s was Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base, right, in Southeast Asia. So being in the Air Force was not something that would necessarily preclude you from going to Vietnam or Laos or any of the rest of the places where we had air bases. But he enlisted, and he became a avionics technician. He fixed planes, cargo planes specifically. His dad was in the Navy in World War II. He was a ball turret gunner in torpedo bombers off of the USS Wasp in the Pacific. My mom's dad he had a couple of jobs, but most of his time was spent as a waist gunner in a B-17 bomber over Europe, right? And then the gun club growing up, where I ended up growing up shooting, was filled with Vietnam, Korea, World War II vets, tons of them. So and then all my dad's buddies from his neighborhood almost all of those guys were veterans as well. So all the male influences in my life as I was growing up were veterans. I won't say it was a foregone conclusion that I was going to go into the military, but it pretty much was.
Yeah.
In some form or fashion, in some capacity, in some way, me going into the military was almost a given.
Were you thinking of that early on as like your path?
Well, I was. In fact, again, priorities not where they should be, and really not thinking through things. I applied for a Navy ROTC scholarship, and my grades were atrocious. Like, I'm surprised they didn't laugh at they probably took my application and threw it away. But yes, that was my thought, was I go to the Navy, go Navy ROTC. I had aspirations, as much of my generation did, of being a fighter pilot, right? We all got sucked in by Top Gun. It was the greatest recruiting film of all time. But that was really kind of what I wanted to do. And so, again, grades didn't have it, got denied the ROTC scholarship. And so I didn't really know, I didn't want to go to college. In my head, I would much rather have enlisted and gone into the military. Mm-hmm. But my parents weren't having that. It was an absolute non-starter. So I got sent to college. And I went to Western Illinois University, and I was a law enforcement administration, criminal justice major there. And so, like I said, I had an older sister who was 2 years older than me. So she's a junior, I'm a freshman in college. I got a little sister that's 3 years younger than me. So she's coming behind me, not all that far to go to college, right? And my parents, again, very blue collar, very middle class. And truthfully, now you're talking 2 kids in college with another one coming. And, sometimes hard to make ends meet. I went to my freshman year on a Pell Grant. Do you mind handing me one of those bottles of water, please?
And for those that don't know, what is a Pell Grant?
So Pell Grant is a government grant that is essentially free college money. It's not a loan. It is a grant. So because of my parents' income, because of having a sister in college, all of those things, they got, my mom applied and got me a Pell Grant. So it was enough to pay for my freshman year of college. I got told after my freshman year, even when I expressed the fact that I didn't want to go back, that I was going back, but I also had to figure out how to pay for it. So I'm at Western Illinois, and again, the military is kind of always in the back of the mind. And a friend of mine from my freshman year, who was in a very similar situation, was a South Side of Chicago kid. He said, and this was like right at the beginning of the semester, and he was like, hey, we were talking about having, like, I got to figure out how to pay for this. He's like, oh yeah, me too. And he said, he did some research, and he goes, in Illinois, we go to a state school. If you enlist in the National Guard in Illinois, and you go to a state school, they pay your tuition, and you get paid. So you get paid, you get a state GI Bill, there's some other benefits. This could pretty much pay for college. And I was like, man, that sounds like a great idea. So we go down and we talk to the National Guard recruiter, and the guy confirms everything. And so at that point, I was like, well, this is what I'm going to do. This is the solution to everything.
This is before the OCS thing, right? This is
before, this is just my kind of like, I need to get college paid for. I want to go, I've got this desire to serve. This solves all kinds of things.
Right.
So I called my parents and I said, hey, I think this is what I want to do. And my mom was, and she was through my entire career, super, super supportive. And I'm not saying my dad wasn't, but he's a Vietnam era guy. And in fact, his best friend growing up got killed in Vietnam. So when I tell my dad, hey, I want to join the National Guard, and oh, by the way, the unit that I want to go to is an infantry unit, he starts getting this like, yeah, I'm not a fan of this. Why don't you go be an MP? Like, you're getting a criminal justice degree. Why don't you go be a military police officer? It's not really what I want to do. I want to go try this infantry thing. It's a test. It's physical. It's a man thing. I want to go, And so they backed me, both of them. So November 13th, Friday the 13th of 1992, I enlisted in the Illinois National Guard as an infantryman. And so, it was a lead up, right, to get there. And what I had done was I started the basic introductory ROTC classes at Western Illinois, just to get some knowledge, right? Before I did this enlistment thing, before I joined anything, I just wanted to learn a little bit more than I actually knew. So I started that, and then I enlisted. I went to the MEP station in St. Louis, right? Because we were coming from Macomb, Illinois, where Western Illinois is at. And they drive us down to St. Louis, and you go through a bunch of briefings. You take the ASVAP again, right? You go through the physical. You go through all of these things, the whole process. I'll never forget the first day we're there, right? Everybody's there, and there were these two kids, and they were going to the Marine Corps. And they were going to shave their heads, like they had their heads shaved already, like they were in it, man. They hadn't even enlisted yet, but they were like sold. And so they put us all in this big room, and they're like, okay, while you're here, you're going to go through this. You're going to do the ASVAP. You're going to take the physical, your medical exam, blah, 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 blah. You're going to take a urinalysis. You're going to be tested for marijuana, cocaine, amphetamine, blah. And they list out all these things. Literally, these two kids got up and they walked out. I was like, and no kidding, they walk out, right? So everybody, you got probably 200 kids in the room, right? Everybody watches them, right? And they walk out, and the guy stopped talking, and they got up and they walked out, and the door closed behind him. He goes, okay, so everybody's going to get a urinalysis, and you're going to get it while you're here, unless you're enlisting in the Marine Corps, in which case you're going to get it when you get to your entry-level training, which would have been months away for these kids. But they got up and walked out because they thought they were going to get urinalysis that day. Hilarious. But anyway, so I enlisted. I took the ASVAP while I was there, and I actually, I maxed the ASVAP. I could have taken any job in the military. And so when I sat down at the end of all, I'd done the medical, I'd done the ASVAP, I'd done all the things, and I sit down with the the recruiter at the end who's, you start signing all the paperwork. And he goes, man, you got max GT score, max the ASVAB. He goes, what do you want to do? I said, easy. Illinois, National Guard, 11 Bravo Infantry. And he goes, no, man, like you can do anything. Like Navy, like nuclear, enlistment bonuses, like $20,000. Like you can pick anything you want. And I'm like, right. Illinois, National Guard, Infantry, 11 Bravo. That's what I'm doing. And the guy started to get mad at me. And I was like, listen, I will get up and I will walk away. But that's what I'm doing. Because I had it in my head, one, that I was going to stay in school, but two, that I really wanted to be an infantry guy. And so finally I did. Signed it and enlisted and started going to drill right away with the Guard, even before going to basic training and AIT. And I kept going to the ROTC classes for the rest of the school year. So I went in on delayed entry. So you enlist, and then especially they do this a lot with National Guard, right? Because you got a lot of college kids or even high school kids. They're trying to maximize their summer. So you enlist, and if you can afford to wait or they can afford to wait, they send you the following summer. And infantry's easy because it's the shortest basic training and schooling. Like you can fit it in the summer. Like it's pretty convenient. Anything else, like infantry schools was back then 5 weeks. So you do 8 weeks of basic training, 5 weeks of infantry school. It's 13 weeks. It's a college summer. Anything longer than that, it starts to get a little dicey. So the following May, my mom's birthday is in mid-May, and many, many years it falls on Mother's Day, which that year happened to be my mother's birthday and Mother's Day and the day that my parents had to drive me to O'Hare to put me on a plane to go to basic training. So again, on Mother's Day and my mother's birthday, I had to kind of break her heart a little bit and go off to the Army. So I went down to basic training, and I was in great shape, still running, still playing soccer. All my cardio was great. So basic training was not difficult for me. My dad gave me this great piece of advice before I left. He said, listen, you're 5'10", you have brown hair and brown eyes, you're white, you have a medium build. You can fall into a formation and disappear. You will blend in with everything. If you keep your mouth shut and your head down, they'll never know you're there. And I thought about that, and it is great advice. It is also not my personality. So I'm at basic training. We're there, and I'm just chugging along.
What was your mindset like? Just to ask, not to interrupt you, but
No.
What was your mindset like before you left? Were you nervous? What was your, where's your head at?
I looked at it and I said, listen, thousands and thousands and thousands of people do this. I'm in great physical shape. I'm not a knucklehead. Like this, yes, parts of it are going to suck, but like this is not going to be difficult. So I was nervous at the unknown, but also in the fact that it is a known quantity to, I knew that the days of Full Metal Jacket are over with at that point, right? In the summer of '93, like drill sergeants aren't punching guys. Like that's not what it is anymore. Is it tough? Yes. Is it going to suck some days? Sure it is. Can I make it through? Absolutely. So nervous of the unknown, but no, like I was not, fear was not a thing. I wasn't scared like any of that. I was welcoming kind of the adventure.
Yeah, excited almost.
Yeah.
So the guys that you were around, the vets that you would shoot with and stuff like that, did they prep you pretty well, or did they just give you?
No, most of them were like, unsurprised. When I talked to them, there was no big shock that I was going to do that. I felt welcomed into the club because like the guys who were Army were, like, hey, good job, and the guys who were Marines were giving me shit, and the guys who were Air Force, you know what I mean? Like I immediately felt welcomed, and I hadn't done anything yet. I'd enlisted. I hadn't even gone to basic training yet. But because I was on my way and I was on that path, like I was welcomed into that brotherhood very, very quickly by all of those guys. And while, military guys are always very boisterous, the ones who are closest to you are also the ones who will pull you aside and throw their arm around you and say, hey, I'm proud of you. And I got a lot of those, which was great.
But they felt
grandfathers, all my dad's buddies, like, proud of you. You're going to do great things. Take care of yourself. Be safe. It was those kinds of things, and that felt great. It's also very calming, especially when you kind of look around and you go, man, all these guys did this. Like, I can do this. Clearly, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people have done this. I can do this. So, I got down there and it really wasn't that difficult. I stood out a little bit in the fact that I was in such great shape. I did very, very well at PT. And even in our earlier PT test, the Army Physical Fitness test, I scored very high, which makes you stand out very quickly, right? I can remember we were maybe 4 or 5 weeks in, probably 4 weeks in, and we'd just taken a physical fitness test and I'd scored very high, and we were out at a machine gun range, and they delivered chow to us, right, for lunch. They delivered, hot, or maybe it was even dinner time, but they delivered dessert, which in this case was ice cream sandwiches. Now, I don't know about anybody else going through basic training, but I know in 1993, in the company that I was in, which was Bravo Company 258 Infantry, you were not allowed to have dessert. Chow hall, anything. They had a couple rules when we ate chow. One, the only utensil you got was a big spoon. That was it. You got a tablespoon. No knives, no forks. You could eat everything with a tablespoon. We learned how to eat steak with a tablespoon, right? You had to have 2 glasses of water with every meal, and you had to drink them dry. Now, you could also have the Kool-Aid or the milk. We weren't allowed soda, and we weren't allowed any caffeine. But you could have milk, you could have juice, you could have Kool-Aid, but you had to have the 2 glasses of water, and you were never allowed to have dessert. Those are the rules, right? We had a couple of other ones, but those are the big ones. So we're out at this machine gun range, and it was dinner chow is what it was, because we were waiting for it to get dark because we were going to shoot at night too. We'd shot during the day, we were going to shoot at night. And dinner chow gets delivered, we all eat dinner, right? And we're just kind of hanging around, and all of a sudden one of the drill sergeants yells, anybody who got a 290 or above on their PT test, get over here. And in my head, I'm like, well, they know who we are because there's only like 4 of us, right? So out of a company of 250 guys, there was only like 4 or 5 of us that had scored that high on the PT test. So we all go running over there. Privates standing at parade rest, scared to death because we don't know what the hell the drill sergeants are about to do to us. And they're like, you all got 290 or above. We're like, yes, drill sergeant, They're like, all right. And they gave each of us an ice cream sandwich. And it was like, we almost thought it was a trap. Like, what am I supposed to do with this? We're not allowed to have dessert. We're not allowed to have dessert. Like, eat it, goddammit. Shove the whole thing in your mouth, right? And you're halfway through it, and all of a sudden you get ice cream brain freeze, And it was like the first reward that any of us had gotten for anything, truthfully.
Was this at Fort Benning?
This was at Fort Benning, right? So, like I said, the PT thing was about the only thing where I was either purposefully or accidentally standing out. And then one night I got put on CQ, right? Which CQ, actually CQ, fire guard, whatever you want to call it. But there was a drill sergeant on duty at night. When all the privates are in bed, everybody's in their bunk, right? There's a drill sergeant that's on duty all the time. And there's always 2 privates sitting there answering the phone if somebody calls or whatever. There's always 2 guys on duty. So one of my 3 drill sergeants, a guy named Frank Hall, Drill Sergeant Hall, it was his night to be on duty. So that meant our platoon had to provide CQ while he was on duty. So it's my shift. me and this other kid, and we're sitting down there, and he comes out and he goes, all right, listen, goddammit, I'm going in there, and I'm going to go take a nap. If anybody comes, you know, or he told us, like, if the captain comes or anybody like that, anybody in the chain of command comes, you come get me. Anybody else, I don't want to fucking hear it. We're like, okay, roger that, drill sergeant. He goes, and you're not coming off duty until I come out of that room. Now, we were only supposed to be on for an hour, so we have no idea how long this is going to last. He might go in there and fall asleep for who knows how long. He's in there, and he's not in there for 10 minutes. And this woman comes walking through the company area. Beautiful blonde lady, black cotton dressed, form-fitting, fairly confident. She had nothing on underneath. And she has a cake in her hands, right? So I look at the kid that I'm on duty with, and I'm like, what the you know? So she comes walking up, and she goes, is Sergeant Hall around? And I'm like, yes, ma'am. Let me go get him. So I go and I bang on the door, metal door, right? Bang on. Drill Sergeant Hall. He's like, Novak, what the fuck do you want? And I'm like, Drill Sergeant, you want to come out here? He goes, Novak, this better be fucking important, right? And I'm like, fuck. So he opens the door and he comes out. He goes, what is it? And I was like, Drill Sergeant, there's a woman here. She wants to talk to you. And he goes, a woman? I was like, yeah, blonde lady, very pretty. He's like, oh. So he walks out. It's his girlfriend and it's his birthday. So she shows up on his birthday, brings him this birthday cake. And he goes, oh, all right, you know. And he looks at me, he goes, all right, we're going back there. You better not fucking bother us. I was like, roger that, drill sergeant, you know. So he goes, they disappear. You can make assumptions. I can make assumptions. I don't know anything for sure. But so half an hour or so later, come back out. She leaves. The kid that I was on duty with is sitting there, and he is out cold. He's dead ass asleep, right? The drill sergeant looks at him. He's like, shook his head. He goes, Novak. He goes, you're National Guard, right? I said, yes, drill sergeant. He goes, you in college? Yes, drill sergeant. He goes, you in ROTC? I said, well, I take the classes, drill sergeant. He goes, okay. Well, if you're thinking about being a lieutenant, he goes, I'm going to teach you how to be a lieutenant. Tomorrow, you're the platoon guide, which basically it's like the one private in charge of all the other privates, right? They got to have somebody who's in charge. So they take somebody and they make them the, you know, platoon guide or platoon leader for the platoon of trainees. And I'm like, oh, thanks, drill sergeant. He's like, no, he goes, this is good for you. Trust me. I was like, okay. So he goes back, we change out shift. And then the next day, like I'm standing there and I'm the platoon guide. And he took a liking to me a lot. And he started taking me with him almost everywhere he could get away with. If he had to go, you know, as an example, we were out in one of our training exercises near the end. That happened right at the end of basic training and right as we were going into infantry school. And so we're out in the woods, you know, it's been raining on us for like 3 days because it's Georgia and it's July. And, you know, he's out there with us and he's, you know, Novak, you know, I hear my name through the woods. Come here. I grab my shit and I run up there. I don't know what he wants. And he's sitting, he was a Ranger guy. So he was a Ranger Regiment NCO. The Army made him a drill sergeant and he hated being a drill sergeant. The guy was a physical freak. He had done the best Ranger competition like 4 or 5 times. Halo scuba qualified. Like he was a certified badass, this guy. And so he's sitting there and he's sitting next to his rucksack and he's like changing his socks. And he goes, sit down. Okay. I sit down. And he's like, take your boots off. Relax for a little while. I'm like, oh, okay, drill sergeant. So I'm like chilling out. And he takes a big old can of Copenhagen out of his pocket, as all infantry guys did back then. And he was a guy who used the lid like a shovel, right? He didn't take a pinch like most guys. Literally jam the lid into the can and he'd like scoop it out. And he'd put the whole thing in his lip. He was one of those big So he puts a big old dip in, which they weren't supposed to do in front of us back then. And we weren't allowed to smoke and we weren't allowed to chew. But he goes to put it back in his pocket. And I was a reformed smoker at the time, right? I had been a smoker. I smoked through most of high school and then into college. But obviously basic training, I hadn't been doing that. So he goes to put it back in his pocket. He goes, "Oh shit, I'm sorry." He goes, you want a dip?" And in my head, I'm like, this has got to be a trap. It has to be. And I was like, nah, I don't think. He's like, "No, you want one?" I was like, "Yes, Drill Sergeant." He goes, "Here." And he threw it at me. I'm like, okay. So I put a dip in my mouth, which I hadn't done since high school. And so we're sitting there and we're having this conversation. And he's talking to me about being a lieutenant. And he's just kind of giving me all this mentoring that I'd never expected. And then all of a sudden, out of the woods behind me comes the captain, right? The commander for our basic training company. And Drill Sergeant, I remember he looks right at me. And I just like put my head down, because I got a dip in my mouth and I'm not supposed to have it. And he gave it to me. And here's his boss comes walking out of the woods. So I put my head down. And so the two of them have a conversation. And the captain walks off. And as soon as he clears the vision, I'm like, I spit off into the woods. And he looks at me and goes, "You're going to make a good fucking lieutenant, Novak." He goes, "If you take care of your NCOs like you just took care of me, you're going to be a good fucking lieutenant." And it stayed like that. It literally until I graduated. We had a good friend of mine. You walk back. They have a name for it now. Back then, they may have had it, but I don't remember it. But you walk back from this last training event. It's like maybe a 15-mile road march, carrying a pack and all that stuff. And, for most guys, it's a significant emotional event. And so you get back and, you dump all your shit and you clean your weapons and you turn them in and you change into PT gear. And, we're standing in line for chow, first meal back at the chow hall. And this good friend of mine passes out in the chow line, just face down. So we're like, shit, And they evac him and they take him to the hospital. And later that day, Drill Sergeant comes by and goes, "Novak, go get so-and-so's shave kit out of his locker. I know you've got his combination." So I go and I get him a set of PTs and his shave gear and all that shit. And I come downstairs and I go to hand it to him. He's like, "No, come on, we're going to go see him in the hospital." I jump in the truck with the Drill Sergeant. And, same thing. We're driving down the road and he puts a dip in and he tosses the can at me. And, and I'm like, this is surreal. It's just weird. I put a dip in. I'm just driving around with the Drill Sergeant, having a dip. And it was like that literally until graduation. And what I realized in those last really 2 or 3 weeks, especially with him, was that I loved being in the Army and I loved everything about the Army and I loved being an infantryman. I hated being a private. It just what it's not something I wanted to do. I didn't want to progress from there to go, live in the barracks and mop floors. And when I went down there, I enlisted. And again, I didn't really want to be in college. And I really wanted to be in the Army. So after I enlisted, I pretty much decided that once I went to basic training, I wasn't going to come home. I didn't tell my parents or anybody else that. But that in my head is what I decided. So my second semester, my sophomore year of college, weekends started on Wednesdays. I tried really hard to fail out of school. I partied my ass off for that whole, I finished second semester sophomore year. That semester was a 1.77 GPA. Bombed it and didn't care because in my head, I'm going to the Army and I'm not coming back. In fact, you're in basic training, you're in the Army for a week or so, whatever it is, 10 days, and they allow you to make that phone call back to your family, first phone call. And back then we were still writing letters. We still had to write the form letter. "Dear Mom and Dad," the drill sergeant standing up there saying, "Okay, copy this down. Dear Mom and Dad." Everybody writes down, "Dear Mom and Dad. I am at Fort Benning. I am at Fort Benning. I am doing just fine. I am doing just fine. You know, and we all sent that form letter home. But not long after that, you get an opportunity to call home. And, you know, they literally, like they did the math. There was, you know, however many guys, 59 guys in our platoon. There was 6 phones. We had, you know, whatever it was, 30 minutes for everybody to get it. We all had like a 37-second phone call. And there was a guy there with a friggin' stopwatch. Like, no kidding. So you know, it's my turn. I get up there. I dial. My mom picks up the phone. And for my 37-second phone call, the first 25 seconds, well, the first 2 seconds were, how are you? I'm good, Mom. Okay. And then for the next 25 seconds, she chewed my ass about my grades because the report card had come after I left. And she saw my GPA. But again, in my head, that was the path.
So while you're at basic, before you get too far ahead, give us one of your best stories, I guess your funniest stories, and then one of your worst as far as somebody getting smoked.
Well, best story. We had a kid in my platoon who was from the deep, deep, deep south of Florida, like Everglades. Like the first jacket he ever owned in his life was given to him by the Army. And it wouldn't surprise me if he never had a pair of shoes other than church shoes before he came in the Army. Like he was swamp, dirt poor, homeschooled kid. Outside of the movie theater was, you know, as with every military installation, they use movie theaters for everything, including church. When you're on basic training at Sand Hill for things like Catholic Mass or, you know, some of the bigger Protestant or whatever, they use the movie theater. That was one of the few times that you would get an opportunity to be by yourself, right? So there was a candy machine right out in front of the movie theater. So for weeks, we would all go and you'd walk right past it. You couldn't touch it, right? We finally got an opportunity to go on a pass down to the PX without the drill sergeants. This was probably like 6 weeks in. And, you know, we literally are running down there. This kid stops. This kid from South Florida stops. And he makes a hard left turn to the movie theater. And we're like, where the fuck is he going? So he gets down there and he goes straight to the candy machine. And it was one of the glass face, right, candy machine. And he starts pumping coins into this thing and just hitting the buttons. You know, ka-chunk. You know, and he'd throw more coins in there. Ka-chunk. He had never experienced that in his life. Had never seen a modern candy machine. And he was just watching the shit fall. He wasn't even reaching in there and grabbing it. He was just watching that happen. And I was like, that was one of those where you really realize the makeup of the military. Like far end of every spectrum you can think of, there's somebody there that's in the military that's from that. And that kid was a great example of that. And we were all like, what are you doing, man? And he was like, what? Like, where's this going? Because he couldn't see it. You know, it drops in. He doesn't. Like, he's like, where's it going? Like, reach your hand in there, dude. Just pull. You know, so you got to push the door and pull the candy out. Oh my God, you know. Like, it was just a huge eye opener, especially for a kid who grew up, you know, outside the city like I did. So that was a funny one. 2 more stories. Kid across from me, great kid, skinny. He was from Alabama, I think. Had his girlfriend, his high school sweetheart, pictures in his locker, the whole 9 yards. We get mail call one day, and it was Sunday afternoon, I think. And so we come into the bay and everybody's opening their mail. And all of a sudden he's sitting, leaning up against his wall locker. And he's like, he's got tears in his eyes. And he slept right across from me. I look over, I'm like, hey man, what's wrong? And he just like handed me his letter. He's sitting on the floor. He hands me his letter. And I'm like, so I look at the letter. This is the worst Dear John letter that you can imagine. It is his high school sweetheart who said they were going to get married, right? It is a letter from her saying not only does she still love him, but she has to leave him. And she's found someone else. And that she loves this person so much. And that person turned out to be his own mother. Yeah. His girlfriend left him. So when he left, his girlfriend moved in with his mom. And then they fell in love with each other.
Oh my God.
Now, this kid was like, if you took Private Pile from Full Metal Jacket, right, and you made him skinny and tiny, this kid was kind of Private Pile. And he was like, in true to like with the movie, like from that moment on, like that kid was hard as woodpecker lips. Like he like never quit, run till he throw up, like carry the heaviest weight. Like that kid did everything. And when we graduated, his mother and ex-girlfriend showed up to graduation. And he was going on active duty and was going, I don't remember where he was going from there, maybe Hawaii or something. But graduation ceremony's over with. You know, hey, families, go see your, brand new Army private, whatever. And so he's standing there. And I'm like, he's like off my shoulder. And he goes, hey, stay here. Like I was going home. I was a National Guard guy. Like nobody came to graduation for me. It's no big deal. But he's like, hey, stay here. And I'm like, okay. So I'm standing there and I'm kind of looking over my shoulder. And his mom and his girlfriend walk up and they're like, his mom like goes to hug him. Oh, I'm so proud of you. And he like puts his hand up and he looks at him and he goes, fuck you and fuck you. And he turned around and he walked away from him. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I guess he handled that shit. But the worst smoking was me. I deserved it. So because I had some college under my belt when I enlisted as, I was a private E2, right? So I had mosquito wings. I had one stripe. And again, about week 8 or so, we had been given a pass to go down to the PX to buy whatever it was that we needed to buy. And my rank on my patrol cap, my one little stripe, the black had come off of it. And we had this stuff called MNU, was this black paint that you would use for the metal rank pins. You would use it for like your boot eyelets to keep them black. There's a lot of uses for it. Well, Private Novak did not paint the rank on his cap like he should have. And the drill sergeant on duty on that Sunday happened to be a former member of the Old Guard, which is the ceremonial unit in Washington, D.C., who is the most strict uniform guy you ever wanted to meet in your life. And from about 20 yards away, he goes, you! We'd just come back from the PX. You! And I was like, run over there. Yes, drill sergeant. He goes, why is the rank on your patrol cap not black? And I fucked with all kinds of excuses. And he goes, didn't you just get back from the PX? Yes, drill sergeant. Well, that means you had time to MNU the rank on your cap. And I was like, yes, drill sergeant. At that point, I was like, I am screwed. And so where our unit was, where our building was here. The PT track, like if you left our building, there was a hill that went straight up and the PT track was above it. And he goes, we're all going to chow. And in my head, I'm like, he's not talking about me. He goes, you're going to be the last one to go to chow. I was like, yes, drill sergeant. And I'm thinking, if this is all I'm going to get for punishment, I'm cool with this. He goes, between now and then, what I need you to do is build me a house. Yes, drill sergeant. Made of sandbags. Yes, drill sergeant. On top of that hill. So sandbag weighs about 35 pounds, right? He wanted me to run with sandbags on my shoulders to the top of that hill and build him a house until everybody else had gotten into the chow hall. So, and again, it's like July and it's Fort Benning and it's like 1,000% humidity and it's like 5 in the afternoon. And everybody's clean, right? We've been on pass in the afternoon. So we're all in clean uniforms. So I had to run. First time I put like an idiot. I put 2 sandbags on each shoulder, ran up the hill, dumped 4. I'm like, not doing that again. Run down, I put 1 on each shoulder, run up, dump them. And I keep doing this back and forth. I ended up probably with like 12 or 14 sandbags up there at the top of the hill. By the time he's like, okay, come on, go ahead and get in line. I look like a fucking sugar cookie. Like I'm soaked in sweat, sand on everything, right? And everybody else, and I can't breathe. I can't, like, it just, and I'm just filthy covered in sand. And I deserved every bit of it for being a dumbass. But I did, so I get in the back, I'm the last person into the chow hall. And like, everybody's like, holy shit, you know? Because they didn't see it. Like, as soon as he sent me on my way, they all went and got in line for chow. It's like, we get back to the barracks afterwards. Everybody's like, what the fuck, man? I was like, and I told him, and no kidding, 10 minutes later, he comes up and he finds me and he goes, all right, go bring those sandbags back down. And I'm like, son of a bitch. So I had to go back up and I had to bring them all back down again. So, I mean, we got a lot of group smokings, and group smokings are always fun and they're always funny. You know, if you keep a good sense of humor about it, it's tolerable. But that one...
Did you ever have any situations where it was like something that happened that you tried real hard not to laugh? But
oh, yeah.
Anybody ever laugh?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I was just telling somebody about this on social media the other day. There was somebody who posted a picture of a barracks that had been tossed, right? All the foot lockers tossed, bunks flipped over, like the drill sergeants had clearly gone through like a hurricane, right? And that happens to everybody. I don't care when you went to basic training, boot camp, what service it is. Everybody's shit gets tossed sooner or later. And so our barracks got tossed. And it was this like, you know, they're screaming and yelling at us and telling us that somebody had done something and contraband and all this other shit. So they were bringing us upstairs 2, 3, 4 at a time, right? And they were tossing your shit in front of you. So I'm up there and I'm waiting my turn to get my stuff turned over. And the drill sergeant is on top of the wall locker, right? He's 2 bunks in front of me. He's on top of the wall locker, Drill Sergeant Williams. And he's like, and I could tell, I was watching, he was trying to keep a straight face. And all of a sudden he goes, oh, look what, and he's up in the ceiling tiles, right? Ceiling tiles are popped. He's up there. Oh, look what we have here. And then I see him out of the blouse of his own uniform top. He pulls a pack of Newports and like puts his hand up in there. And then he pulls his handbag out. And I looked at him and he looked at me and I'm like, really, drill sergeant? You know? And he's like, you saw that? And I was like, yeah, I saw that. He's like, shut the fuck up, Novak. You know? And then all the drill sergeants started laughing. And so, you know, they knew and we knew that it was all a game and it had to be done. And maybe the 3 or 4 of us that happened to be up there at the time were kind of onto them. But there were guys that were genuinely like, oh, I don't know what's going on. Why are they so mad? Why is our shit all fucked up? You know, but like the 4 of us that were up there, you know, I caught him pulling those Newports out of his friggin' pocket and we all started laughing, you know? So, yeah, I mean, it's funny, you know, again, if you keep a good sense of humor about it, you know, and the drill sergeants know, you know, when I was a lieutenant, I'll come back to this later, but when I was a lieutenant, I had an opportunity to work for a very brief 6 weeks to work at basic training. They needed help. They were short on drill sergeants. There was a handful of us that were between schools. And so we got to go work out there. And then I got the actual peek behind the curtain on how all this stuff operates, right? And you know it's a game. You know what they're doing, right? You can see it happening, you know. The one that killed me was we walked this, I had just gotten out of Ranger school, and so we did this big long road march with all the privates. We did this 15 or 18 miler for us just out of Ranger school. We're like, this is Tuesday. This is easy, you know. We get back and like the drill sergeants are all in that room. The one I told you about where Drill Sergeant Hall and his girlfriend disappeared to. You know, this was a different building, but they're all built the same. we're all in that room, right, after this 15-mile road march, and all these drill sergeants are like in the back, and their feet are up, and they're like, you know, they're icing their feet and their back, and they're all whining like a bunch of bitches. And then they'd be like, all right, whose turn is it? And they'd be like, oh, it's my turn. And the guy would literally get up. He'd strap his boots and shit back on. And he'd fucking put his drill sergeant hat on. And he'd open the door. You motherfuckers! Ah! Door would close, right? And then he'd go out there and raise hell for 5 minutes, and he would come back in and he would go, fuck. Oh, fuck. You know. So you get that peek behind the curtain, and I like that when I had that experience, I would think back to basic training and the things that I had been through. So that was like the summer of '96, and I went through basic training just 3 years before that, and I'm like all these things started to make sense, and I'm like, those sons of bitches, like they, you know what I mean? Like you'd see all like they didn't all run that fast. They were taking turns. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was all these things that kind of occurred to you in the aftermath. And you're like, son of a bitch, you know, but it is. It's all a game. And it's very purposeful. I mean, basic training is meant, and I have an opinion on what basic training kind of looked like before recent events with the new Secretary of War kind of changing the mindset. But, you know, basic training had gotten a little bit on the softer side of things. But the purpose is, you know, to strip you down, right? To take you down to the bare bones and build you back up in what the Army needs and wants you to be, right? You can be an individual, but you've got to be in the form of the Army, and you've got to be part of the Army team. And the proven method is to strip away all your bullshit that you brought with and to rebuild you into the form of the Army. And they know what they're doing, and it works. And you know, but there is some gamesmanship to it, right? There's just got to be this, you know, they figured out how to do it. And it was very interesting to be subject to it and then get the peek behind the curtain, really not that far, you know, beyond that or into the future, and to learn the differences, to see them. So, yeah, it was interesting. But again, at the end of it all, I was like, I hate being a private. So I went back to Western Illinois, and I joined ROTC full time, and I signed my contract. And now the path was, don't fail out of school, recover from that 1.77 GPA, which I was put on academic probation, as you can imagine, graduate, get commissioned, and then go on active duty as a lieutenant. So the priorities, you know, I mean, it was a complete path. Well, it wasn't a complete path change. You know, the end state was still going to the Army. The route to get there became very, very different.
So is that still National Guard then, or did you go?
No.
Okay, so there's a difference there.
So for the next 2 years, I was part of what they call the simultaneous membership program, SMP. So I was an ROTC cadet, still in the National Guard. And what they did, and I think the program still exists. Unfortunately for me, I went from being a private in a platoon to being the platoon leader for that platoon as a cadet. So I went from being a nobody to being the guy in charge because they didn't have enough lieutenants in the National Guard unit at the time. Now that didn't last very long because they got a lieutenant in, they put him in charge of the platoon, and I kind of shadowed him around. So for the next 2 years, I was kind of a little bit of OJT on what it meant to be a lieutenant, but my intent was always to go on active duty.
What's OJT?
Yeah, on the job training. So I was getting like a free learning experience on how to be a platoon leader in an infantry unit, which is what I wanted to do. So I did that for 2 years, again, with the intent of I'm going on active duty and I'm going infantry. That's what I wanted to do. And so I worked hard. I had to. I worked hard the last couple of years in college to recover from my my sophomore year, and then I graduated in '90. I got what I wanted. I asked for infantry. I asked for active duty, and that's what I got. And
did they send you to officer school while you're in college?
No. So I graduated. Now I did have to I did have to take an extra summer. right? So I graduated with a criminal justice degree, a law enforcement administration degree. So I had to do an internship at a police department. And, you know, I was behind on some hours and some other things, so I couldn't do it. Most guys do it the second semester senior year, right? And then you graduate on time at 4 years. Well, I'd screwed up enough and gotten behind the 8 ball enough where I couldn't do that. So I had a lighter schedule second semester senior year, and then the summer I had to go on the internship. So I did an internship at a police department for 10 weeks, which was educational in very much the same way, in that I realized, and I was in a small department. I went to the police department where I grew up. I lived in my parents' basement for a summer, and I worked crazy hours at a police department, and I did an internship with them, and I learned that being a policeman is a crazy job, and it was something that I could see myself doing, but being a patrolman, I had zero desire to do. If you had given me something else, a SWAT guy, a detective, narcotics, whatever, but just being a guy driving around in a patrol car, which is what I did for most of my internship, is not something I would want to do. So it's very much like the Army. Like, I love being in the Army. I hated being a private. Being in a police department's not a bad thing. Being a patrolman would suck. Like, that was, so I had to do that internship, and I graduated in July of 95. And I'd been given a date to go to the infantry officer basic course, which is, you're getting trained as an ROTC cadet in the general terms of being an officer. You're not getting trained on the specifics of what you're going to do in the Army until you graduate and get commissioned. So you're learning how, through the ROTC classes or programs like the SMP program that I was with the National Guard, and some other opportunities on how to be an officer. And then you get commissioned. And then they send you off to more schooling. Now, with mine, I graduated in July, but they didn't have a school date for me until December. So my school kept me on, I was on active duty, so I stayed at Western Illinois for whatever it was until December as a ROTC recruiting officer on campus. So I worked for the ROTC department, and for those first, few months of the semester, I helped recruit kids into the ROTC program from the school student population. And I learned an incredible golden lesson while I was there. I worked in this office in this very old building, and it had a metal heavy door with that shatterproof glass, with the wires through it. The door was so heavy that it would never stay open. I could put a cinder block in front of it, and it would push it out of the way and close the door. So I was in my office. Somebody knocks on the door, and it's a young lady who's a freshman, right? Very cute young lady. And I get up and I open the door, hey, how are you? What can I help you with? Hey, I have some questions about ROTC. Yeah, sure, come on in, Sit her down at the desk, just like you are, right across from me, and she's asking me questions, and I'm answering. Hey, I'm doing my job, right? I'm supposed to be a recruiting officer. So I'm giving her the whole thing, and we had this female NCO, a sergeant first class, who was Jamaican. She walked past the office, and she stopped, and she looked through my window. And she came and she opened the door, and she stood in the open door. I was like, hey, can I help you, Sergeant? She's like, no, sir. I'll talk to you in a minute. I'm just going to stand here. I'm like, okay. So I finished talking to the girl. I answered all of her questions. She's like, okay, hey, thanks, blah, blah, blah. And, I give her my card, and she walks off. And the sergeant looks at me, and she goes, sir, don't you never do nothing like that ever again. And I looked at her, I was like, what are you talking about? She goes, you can't be alone in a closed door in an office with a young woman. She goes, because you're guilty. I was like, what do you mean I'm guilty? She goes, that girl can walk out of here and say whatever she wants. And the only two people in the room are you and her, and you know what? You're guilty. Don't ever do that again. And I was like, holy shit. Like, that was an eye-opener. It was a great life lesson, professional lesson, right? Now, whether she was right or not, I agree with what she said. And I agree with, taking precautions, protecting yourself, being smart. But it was a great eye-opener for a young officer. And I say that to say, very early in my career, I got a lot of blessings from a lot of people. Drill Sergeant Frank Hall being the first one, right? NCOs like that lady, that Sergeant First Class from the ROTC department that taught, you know, Private Novak and Lieutenant Novak, a lot of things very early that kept, you know, Novak, the Army guy, out of inadvertent trouble or put me on the right path right away. And I got very lucky, very, very lucky.
So so you were commissioned in 96 then?
95.
95, okay. So between 95 and '02, what were you doing? Or I guess between 95 and '01 when 9/11 happened.
Yeah, so I the first year I was at Fort Benning at the infantry school, and they called, you know, Benning School for Wayward Boys. So I went to the infantry officer basic course where they teach you how to be an infantry officer, not just an officer that ROTC covers, but an infantry officer specifically. That was a 16-week course. From there, I went to airborne school where I learned to jump out of airplanes, right? And then from there, I went to United States Army Ranger School for 89 days, which you want to talk about a life-changing experience. Ranger schools, I've been deployed to combat 5 times, and I will tell you Ranger School is harder than all of those.
Well, I guess let's start with the first training regiment. You said, so the 16-week course, was that mostly land navigation and stuff like that?
So it was a lot of that. It was for 16 weeks, we were a week in classroom, a week in the field, a week in classroom, a week in the field. And so we did do land navigation. We spent a whole week doing land navigation. And then, you know, we would do things like, because not everybody had a background like I did. Like I was considered a prior service guy because I had been enlisted, I had been through basic training, I'd gotten the training on all the weapons systems and all that other stuff. Well, not everybody has that. Some people just go through ROTC and really their experience is pretty limited outside of just learning the generalities of being an officer. So, or at least back then. So like we would spend a week at the range shooting. We would spend a week learning how to plan training and then actually go out and do training events. We would go out, you know, it was a lot of those things. It was always a week of class and a week of practical application in the field. But it was all infantry centric. Everything that we were all going to do once we left there and went to our units, that's what we were learning how to do. The very specifics of being an infantryman.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then you went from there. So at what point during that training did you decide to go with the airborne school?
So airborne school was not, that was given. It was like, you're going. All infantry officers back then, and I know during the War on Terror it was a little bit different because priorities were different. But back then, as an infantry officer, if you weren't already airborne qualified, they were sending you to airborne school to learn how to jump out of planes. And then after that, you were going to Ranger school. If you didn't go to Ranger school, you had to go explain yourself to the colonel and tell them why you didn't think you needed to go to Ranger school. Because Ranger school was the stepping off point for every young infantry officer. And the culture of the infantry back then was, as a lieutenant, it didn't matter that you had it because the expectation was that you went to Ranger school and graduated. The people who got discriminated against were the people who didn't pass, who didn't graduate, who didn't earn a Ranger tab. You would show up to your unit and they used to call it a tab check. Like you'd be a brand new second lieutenant, you would show up to your unit and some captain or major would look at you and they would go like this and they would check your left sleeve to see if you had a Ranger tab or not. And then they would decide what to do with you. So it was imperative. We all thought it was, and it was, for the culture of the time, imperative to go graduate from Ranger school. Some guys decided it's not that important. I'm only doing 4 years, I don't care. Or I'm only doing the infantry for 3 years and then I'm going to go do military intelligence or I'm going to go do logistics or whatever. I don't really care about going to Ranger school. You still had to go explain yourself to the colonel and tell him why you thought you didn't need to go. So I went to airborne school, loved it. It was 3 weeks. Again, wasn't difficult. Physically challenging, it wasn't difficult. A lot of people ask, well, what was your first jump like? And I will tell you, most people don't remember their first jump because they're too fucking scared. And I'm the same way, right? Or it not even that you're too scared, it's that there's so much happening, it's like sensory overload, right? It doesn't really hit you. or they ask, were you scared for your first jump? I would tell you more people were scared for their second jump, because the first jump, like there's just all that excitement, right? I'm going to jump out of a plane. This is the coolest shit ever, right? And you go and you do it and it's awesome. And then the second time now you're like, okay, well, I've done it once. And then it starts, like everything starts to settle and slow down. And you're like, I got to do this 4 more times to graduate, right? So a lot of people don't remember, or they weren't scared or whatever their first one, but a lot of people were scared for their second one because it hits home a little bit. I never had, and I have never had that issue jumping. And I jumped for a long time, and I've jumped a lot of times, but I've never had that issue. I will tell you though, Ranger School was ominous because of not just what it is, but the career path, or the path that you're setting your career on based on success or failure. Graduating is a big deal personally. But again, you're meeting a standard that everybody expects professionally. It's the flip side. If you don't graduate, then everybody goes, what's wrong with this guy? Yeah. How come he didn't graduate?
What for viewers that don't know the difference, what is the difference between somebody that goes to Ranger School, gets the Ranger tab, and somebody that goes to regiment?
So Ranger Regiment, 75th Ranger Regiment, which I've never served in, is a special operations unit organization. It's organized into 3 battalions. They are the best light infantry in the world. Okay, without a doubt. Ranger Regiment is a large organization. It's a few thousand people. It is full of guys who kick doors and shoot people in the face. They take on, some of the most challenging operations physically. They take on intricate operations. They do a lot of, especially during the War on Terror, Iraq and Afghanistan, they did a lot of kill capture missions. They took out a lot of high value targets. And frankly, they're physical animals. Like, they're all physically fit. They're highly motivated. They can run for days. They can carry heavy loads. They jump out of planes. They can, it's all of the things that you want them to be, is what the Ranger Regiment is. Okay. Everybody who's in a leadership position in Ranger Regiment has graduated from Ranger School. Right. Young soldiers who go there, fresh out of basic training or something like that, they have to pass a selection course. I think it's called RASP now or something like that, where if it's your first, actually, if you're going to the unit, you have to go through this course to make sure that you're physically fit, that you're capable, that you're all of these things. And they have the opportunity to kick you out if you're not. And that, even if you're an officer or even a senior NCO, like if you were in the Ranger Regiment and you left and you come back again, you still have to get assessed to make sure you're still up to the standard that they expect.
So that's like your preliminary school to get into regiment?
Yeah, to get into regiment. And again, you could, if you leave there and come back, you still got to do it over again because they uphold a very high standard. And so the school itself is the Army Ranger School is a combat leaders course. The definition has changed. The population has changed. They now allow women to go. That's been going on for probably 5 or 6 years now, maybe longer. But the core of Ranger School is to test your leadership abilities under the worst possible conditions. And they try and replicate those conditions by sleep and food deprivation. Those are the 2 biggest contributing factors. So everybody goes to Ranger School and loses weight. I lost 37 pounds while I was there. I went in at 192 and I came out at 155. Wow. That's not uncommon because you go there, you get 2 meals a day, you're averaging 4 or less hours of sleep per day, and you are constantly active. Whether it's missions, mission planning, training, things like rappelling and mountain climbing, or, assault boats down a river, paddling, and all those things. Like, you learn a bunch of skills while you're there, but it's all about physical activity and testing not only your ability to lead when you are at your worst, but you're at your worst and you're trying to lead people who are also at their worst. So you learn how to be a leader under the worst conditions that they can come up with outside of combat. And testing is not, or, passing is not easy. You can fail for physical reasons. You can fail physical fitness tests. You can fail obstacle course. You can fail, they have a test for tying knots, when it comes to rappelling and doing rope work and those kinds of things. But you can fail graded patrols. You're in a leadership position for these missions that you go on. And if the operation's a failure and you're in a leadership role, you failed. And if you failed too many times, you failed the school. You can also get kicked out because of peer evaluations. Like you go in there and you're in a squad of 9 guys, and at the end of every phase, you rank everybody in your squad. And the guy who comes out on the bottom, he gets to do that phase. There's 3 phases. There's a phase in Georgia. The first phase is at Fort Benning. The second phase is in Dahlonega, Georgia, up in the mountains. And the third phase is down at Eglin Air Force Base in the swamps of Florida. So if you get peered, if you fail, you get to do that phase over again. And if you get peered again for the second time, the Army Ranger School has decided you suck. You clearly are not a good team member, and you get booted out of the school. And listen, passing Ranger School without, they call it recycling when you do a phase a second time. Passing Ranger School without recycling, it happens. Guys do it all the time. But there's a pretty low percentage of guys that go straight through Ranger School. I was lucky enough, I got to do Florida twice. And I say that with a lot of sarcasm. But I failed patrols in Florida my first time through, passed the second time, and I graduated. But again, that story's not that uncommon. Like that happens to guys all the time. But it is the true, you learn more about yourself as a leader in Ranger School than you will in any other school in the military that I ever experienced.
So what did that mean to you to get that Ranger tab put on?
So that was the time where I really had to tell myself over and over again, there's no reason you can't do this. Tens of thousands of guys have made it through this, since it opened in the 50s. You're no better, no worse than them. You can do this. It's a mental game, right? That you have to, because those days, like basic training days might suck sometimes. Ranger School days suck a lot. Like a lot. Lack of food, lack of sleep, high stress. So graduating from Ranger School for me was probably my greatest individual achievement in the Army. And again, I served for 24 years and I did a lot of crazy stuff. But Ranger School, making it through that and proving to myself, not anybody else, proving to myself that I can make it through that school under those conditions and graduate and wear Ranger tab for the rest of my life. That's what that meant to me. It was huge.
Can you recall the most difficult thing that you had to do in Ranger School?
The most difficult thing I had to do in Ranger School is when I got told I had to do Florida over again.
Yeah. What caused that?
So I had a patrol that I was given on a day. It was a boat. It was in Florida, and it was a boat movement day, and the guy who planned it. So they take opportunities. Like somebody will do all the planning, and then they'll hand it off to a guy to do either one phase of execution or one of the phases of execution, and they'll hand it off again. Because they got to get everybody opportunities to get graded, right? So the guy who planned it handed it off to me for execution, and the plan was terrible. Now, I'm not blaming him, because what I should have done was taken his plan, fixed it, and then moved out and done the things that needed to be done. I took his plan, I read it, I realized it was shit, but I tried to execute it anyway, and it turned into a disaster. So my lack of decisiveness in that specific case was my downfall. And, we launched the boats late. And you know what I mean? Like everything just snowballed. We launched the boats late. We got to our objective late. We got like everything, and, they gave me an opportunity on the very last patrol that if I had passed that, I would have passed. And collectively, it was the very last day, very last patrol. We were all exhausted. Everything was bad, and we all failed. Like all of us together failed. Wasn't just me. It was like everybody who was in the chain of command failed together. And so, they pull you in, and every student comes in. Hey, you're a go or you're a no-go. And they tell you what you were a go or no-go for. And so, they haul me in. Ranger Novak, whatever my roster number was back then, I don't even know. Ranger Novak, how do you think you did? I look at him like, Sergeant, I failed 2 patrols. He goes, you know that? I said, yeah, I'm confident. So I know I'm a recycle. And it's somewhere in my head, as everybody does in that situation, you're hoping that you're wrong. You're hoping that they're like, no, man, you actually passed. No, you're good. You're graduating. And he looks at me and goes, yep, you're fucked up. You get to do this again. And I'm like, roger that, And so, like, you got to come to grips with that. Because if I fail patrols again, I'm done. Like, I'm kicked out of the school. When I go around again, when I get to do Florida again, if I fail patrols twice, I'm done. And then no graduation. So, that day, coming to grips with that and being so close. I mean, you're like, I think we were 4 days from graduation. Like, when they tell you that, it's like literally you've got to pack your stuff up, go from Florida back to Fort Benning, go through some processing at Fort Benning, turn your gear in, and then graduate. You're like 4 days from graduation. They're like, no, you got to stay. And you're like, ah. And coming to grips with that, when you're smoked, you're tired, you're physically fucked up, you're hungry, all that, that's a hard one to overcome.
Does that force you to be more accountable for yourself on top of...
Forever. Because
you can't really... Like, if you would have blamed that guy, it probably would have been even worse off for you,
yeah.
Right? Like, so... Yeah. Just owning
and that was it. I never forgot that. My whole military career, I never forgot that. So, in the sense of being decisive, like, I'm a big proponent for an 80% decision now is better than 100% decision too late. And even worse than that is no decision. So I was always more in the, like, let's not waste time. Let's cut to the chase. Let's make the decision. Let's move out. We'll fix it as we're going. Like that was my mindset for the rest of my military career. I never forgot that. Wow. Yeah, it was very, very impactful to come to grips with why. The second patrol where everybody failed, and like anybody could look at that and go, well, I know why that happened. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because you just look at it and you're like, that was failing before it started. Like we were all, we were a mess together and we all deserved to fail. Okay, fine. But the one before that was on me. And I knew it was on me. Mm-hmm. So you got to come to grips with that. And again, I never forgot it.
That's impressive. So when did you get your tab? 90?
So it's fall of 96.
Gotcha.
So I started in class 896 and I graduated in class 996 because of the recycle in Florida.
Cool.
Yeah.
So from there
I had to go to one more school. And actually I had a 6-week window before I went to Bradley Leaders course. So I graduated from Ranger School and originally I was supposed to go to Hawaii. That was supposed to be my duty station as a lieutenant. And when I went to the infantry school, infantry officer basic course, like the first day, they're like, all right, who here's got orders to go to Hawaii? Like 25 of us raise our hands. Like, put your hands down. And I put my hand down and I'm like, that's not good. And they're like, probably one of you is going to Hawaii from this class. And so the 25th Infantry Division at the time was scaling down from 3 brigades to 2 on the island. So they had an overstrength of lieutenants. They didn't need more. So, throughout school, they were trying to place all of us into new duty stations. And I went to Ranger School not knowing where I was going next, which is not a great position to be in, right? So the day I graduated Ranger School, they're like, here's your orders for your Ranger tab. Congratulations. Here's your orders for Bradley Leader course. And here's your orders for Fort Riley, Kansas. And I'm like, Fort Riley, Kansas? Like, I went from Hawaii to Kansas? And it was a quiet blessing. But in this, I had to go to Bradley Leader's course, but I had 6 weeks in the middle. And those 6 weeks are when I had the opportunity to go work at basic training, which was awesome because I got to be around soldiers. Really, for the first time as an officer. Like Ranger School, everybody takes your rank off and everybody's just a ranger. It doesn't matter what rank you are because everybody's a student. But as a lieutenant, my first time around privates as a lieutenant was those 6 weeks at basic training. And I knew I made the right choice. Like, I was like, yep, this is where I need to be. So from there, I went to Bradley Leader's course, which was a 6-week course in the Bradley fighting vehicle. You learn how to operate it and shoot it and maintain it and fix it and all of those things. And then I went to Fort Riley, Kansas as a lieutenant. And, you know, the only thing going on at the time in the Army was the Balkans. And you know, Bosnia was big. Kosovo hadn't even really happened yet. But everybody was cycling through the Balkans. So it was Bosnia, Bosnia, Bosnia. That's all everybody talked about. And so, you know, we're at Fort Riley. We're in the middle of the country. We are like the lowest tier deployable unit in the Army. And so we trained a lot to not do a lot except train. And again, it was a little bit of a blessing because I learned how to be, I had some great NCOs that took care of me, that taught me a lot. They didn't just, I walked in there and I was interestingly enough, one of very few guys with a Ranger tab. So I walked in there as a second lieutenant with a Ranger tab, and there might have been, out of 30 lieutenants in the battalion, there might have been 4 other guys with a tab when I got there. So I showed up and it was like wildfire. Like, oh, there's a new lieutenant here. He's got a Ranger tab. You know, and all these captains came to find me. They wanted to see who I was. Who's this kid who showed up with a Ranger tab? Because I was an anomaly. And so I became pretty high demand pretty quick, which was kind of nice. Not that I had a choice in anything, but nice to be wanted. But we trained a lot. And I had some NCOs who took good care of me. They taught me, protected me from doing stupid lieutenant things. And a great example. So we went out to the National Training Center, which is this. I ended up working there as a lieutenant colonel, but National Training Center is Fort Irwin, California. It is the Army's desert training center. It's the biggest game of laser tag you've ever seen in your life. Tanks, helicopters, everything's got laser tag on it. And so you go out there and you fight these pretend bad guys, and you get the opportunity to shoot live bullets in the desert, like at, you know, real range. You know, I'm not talking like on a static range or like you can drive and shoot out there. I mean, it's amazing. We went out there for a training rotation, and my platoon had a very successful rotation. And one of the things that used to happen back then, this was in 97, you know, you're out in the desert for 10 days together and people start getting on people's nerves. And so at the end of a rotation, it was not uncommon for a unit before they left the desert to park somewhere, circle all the vehicles up, and let people settle grudges out in the desert. And so all the Bradleys, there's 14 in our company, all the Bradleys are in a circle, and I'm sitting up on a turret with my NCOs, and you know, some guys are like calling each other out, and they're wrestling in the middle, and you know, the first sergeant's playing referee and all this stuff, and people are just blowing off steam. And the other 2 platoon leaders jumped in there. And, you know, the company commander, who I'm still friends with, a guy named Jeff Berkmeyer, was a great mentor to me too, was like, get in there, Clay, get in there. And I was like, I'm game, I'll go. You know, I've never been afraid of scrap in my life. And I leaned forward to jump off the Bradley to go get in there and scrap with these other 2 lieutenants. And my NCOs, 3 of them, 3 hands grabbed me. And I turned around, I looked at them, they're like, sir, don't do that. We've had a great rotation. We're the best platoon out here. You don't need to get in the middle of that mess. Let them be idiots. I was like, okay. And they were, again, it was all about like, be responsible. Don't be an idiot. There's no reason to go do that, you know? And so, you know, I was like, okay. And I sat there. And, you know, my company commander came over to me later. We got back to the, you know, we get done screwing around and we get all the way back. And he goes, hey, how come you didn't jump in with those guys? Scrap it out, you know? I said, well, you know, sir, I got some advice from the NCOs. It probably wasn't a good idea. He goes, they were right. He goes, I called you out just to see if you would do it. He goes, I'm glad you didn't. I was like, well, I appreciate it. So that was, you know, I had those experiences as a lieutenant. I went from being a platoon leader in a Bradley platoon to being a company XO in a Bradley company. And then I had a company commander get fired. I was the XO, I was second in command of the company, and I was supposed to go be the scout platoon leader in the battalion, which is like the primo, like that is the job for a lieutenant. It's the coolest job there is because you're the reconnaissance guy. Like you're off on your own all the time. You're never, there's no leadership around. Like you're out there jamming and doing tactical stuff. It's a great job. So I got picked to be that guy and I was waiting to go. There was a school for it. And so I had this company commander who was a prior enlisted guy, who was a Ranger Regiment guy, and he was just a big knucklehead. He just was. And the shorter version of the story is he got into an argument with an NCO and he laid his hands on the sergeant as a captain and really gave the chain of command no choice. They had to fire him. So he gets fired. I'm second in command. They put me in charge of the company, which I thought was awesome until I missed my date to go to the scout school, the scout platoon leaders course. And then they brought in another captain to replace me. So I missed the job that I wanted because of this dumbass. And then they pulled me out of a job that I was happy to take as a company commander, as a lieutenant, which doesn't happen. I commanded the company for, I don't know, 4 weeks or 6 weeks, something like that. And the battalion commander comes down. He's like, hey, I'm bringing so-and-so down here. He's taking over Delta Company. I'm like, sir, what are you talking about? He goes, yeah. He goes, so-and-so's in line. We're going to put him in command. I was like, sir, am I still going over to the scout platoon? He's like, well, no, you missed the course. We had to send somebody else. Well, what's next for me? He's like, oh, I'm going to put you in the S3 shop, the operations shop. I'm like, I don't want to do this. And they came down on orders for Bosnia. And so, you know, I was the senior lieutenant in the battalion, and he called me into his office. And he's like, so we're going to Bosnia. I was like, okay, sir. He's like, so you're going to stay, right? I was like, well, sir, it depends. What are you going to have me doing? He's like, well, you stay in the S3 shop. I was like, so I'm going to go to Bosnia for 6 months and track patrols from a tent. And he was like, yeah, you too good for that? I'm like, no, sir. I said, I'm not too good for it, but I don't want to do it. I said, I'd rather just go to school, move on to my next duty station. That didn't go over real well. So, you know, I got moved. I got put into a position where basically it was like everybody who's getting out of the Army, retiring, or changing stations in the next few months, they pulled them all out and they consolidated them into one unit, the rear detachment, and they put me in charge of those guys until I left and I went to school, the captain's career course. So I left there after that, early 99, and I went back down to Fort Benning and I went to the captain's career course and I learned how to be a captain down there, an infantry captain. And then I went to Fort Bragg, which I didn't want to go to initially, as crazy as this sounds. I wanted to go to the 101st. Some in my head, you know, it's just where I wanted to go. But the Army decided to send me to Fort Bragg and to the 82nd Airborne Division. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. And so I got to Fort Bragg and you know, I got put into a battalion and I was the logistics officer for the battalion for 15 months. I hated that job, and I really did not like my boss, and I was on the verge of getting out of the Army. I was very close. I was miserable. In the 82nd, to command an infantry company, which was my goal, you have to be jump master qualified. So in an airborne unit, jump masters are the guys who are responsible for inspecting parachutes and putting people out safely out of airplanes, right? So when you see all the film footage, right, the guys that are hanging out the door and, you know, you're putting all the jumpers out and then you jump out with them and all that, you have to be certified to do that, to command. Back then, I think the standard, I think they put that back in place now, but you have to do that, had to do that before you could command a rifle company. Well, my boss kept kicking the can. I'd go, you had to take a pre-test to even qualify to go to the school. And so I'd go and I'd take the pre-test and I'd get a date to go to the school. And then my boss would decide something else was more important and I couldn't go to the school. And like, I hated the job and I was really not liking him. And every time that it got kicked down the road, I got more and more pissed off. I was really, really close to getting out of the Army. And I actually told him that I was getting out. And he, back then, there was an exodus going on in the Army. Guys my age, from the class of 95, 94, and 96, but mostly 95, an abnormally large number of officers got out at the end of their initial term. The Army plans for attrition based on years and years and years of data. They know about how many every year are going to get out. We, for whatever reason, were a lot bigger than normal. So anytime a captain got out, somebody had to go to explain to a general why that captain got out and what his leadership did to try and keep him in the Army because they were so shorthanded. So if you told your chain of command, hey, I'm getting out, they got a little nervous because they would have to go explain to the general why. And so a few things led up to it. We had this thing called prop blast. So in the airborne community, there's something called prop blast, which is like this hazing event. And don't let anybody tell you it's not hazing, because it is, and it's okay. But it's a hazing event, right? And so we had prop blast, and it was July, and it was our regimental birthday. I was in the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment. And, you know, we had it on the regimental birthday in July. So we got up, we did this 5-mile run. We were playing sports all day, and then we were supposed to go into prop blast, which is another, again, it's a hazing event. So I played like 3 games. I ran the 5 miles. I played like 3 games of soccer. And then like the first thing I got to do for prop blast is take an Army PT test. So I'm like in the 2-mile run at like 4 in the afternoon. It's like 1,000 degrees outside. And like I started to pass out. I was dehydrated as fuck. And I went down and they took me to the hospital. And they put 6 IV bags in me. That's how dehydrated I was. And so, but that morning, before the 5-mile run, I sent an email to my boss. And I said, hey, sir, just so you know, I'm pretty close to getting out. And I just want you to know that. Like, I'm applying to police departments. Like, I'm pursuing my options. Hit send, walked out of the office, did the 5-mile run, played soccer all day, did the 2-mile run, passed out, ended up in the emergency room. So he comes to me in the emergency room and he's like, I got your email. I'm like on my 4th IV bag. It literally wasn't even like, are you okay? Is everything all right? How are you feeling? It was like, I got your email. We need to talk about this. I'm like, you motherfucker. So the next day was a dress ball, like a dress blues formal event. And so I didn't need to go. Like, I had been given a pass because of being in the emergency room. But I went and he pulled me out in the hallway. And I said, listen, sir, here's the deal. You keep jacking me around in jump master school. And like, I can't command a company until then, until I graduate. And like 3 times you've kicked this down the road and I'm getting tired of it. Nothing is so important in the Army that you can't let a captain be gone for 11 days. Like, it's not. And so he acknowledged that and said, hey, you know, let's set a date for sure. Nothing moving, you know, blah, blah, blah. So we set the date for I said, okay, sir, if you move this, if this gets canceled for any reason, I'm out. I'm getting out, and I'm going to make it loud. So I went to Jump Master School that November of 2000, and I passed. So I got slated to take command of a company, Bravo Company 3505, very near and dear to my heart. I took command February 2nd of 2001. And so there I am, you know, Captain Novak, infantry officer, 82nd Airborne Division, Jump Master, Ranger qualified, doing all the awesome things I wanted to do. And loving life, just loving life. And training up this rifle company. We had a reputation. I used to make us walk everywhere. We never took trucks anywhere for training or anything. If we jumped at 2 o'clock in the morning, we walked back to the barracks. We walked everywhere. And it became a reputation. And the guys hated it, but they also would talk shit about everybody else, which was awesome. You know, every time we would ruck up and start walking back, you know, Charlie Company or whoever was getting on trucks or buses to go back, and we'd be rucking up to walk, you know, and my guys would be, you know, calling names and, you know, we're better than you are and all that good stuff. And then as soon as they were gone, like, this fucking sucks. But that was, we had a reputation for, you know, being fit, being tough, being able to shoot, because after a while, these long walks, I got them to the point where we would walk part of the way, we would stop. So think about this. We do an airborne operation at 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, that timeline started at noon the day before. So you're up, right? You're doing all this stuff leading up to a jump at 2 a.m. You're doing tactical operations until 5 a.m., maybe 6. Then you ruck up, right? And you start walking back. You walk maybe 6 miles, and then you stop at a range and shoot, right? And then you get done shooting, and then you walk the rest of the way back, right? Like, that's some good ass realistic training. And it's good. It's like it tests you physically, mentally, your capability. How tired am I? Can I still shoot when I'm smoked? You know, those kinds of things. So the guys, again, they hated it and they loved it at the same time. But that was the reputation that we built in that company. And it wasn't just me. I had some, you know, my lieutenants were amazing. I had fantastic NCOs. A lot of great young soldiers who just, you know, were just go-getters. I had a lot of kids who I always talk, you know, my favorite soldiers were the kids who walked that fine line of being in or out of trouble, right? They always reminded me of, truthfully, of me running around the city of Chicago as a teenager, right? Getting in a little bit of trouble, you know, just enough to not be real trouble, but still, right? Those soldiers for me were always the best soldiers. You could always rely on them to get shit done because they would do what needed to get done. And I had a company full of them.
It's interesting you say that too, because I know that I've read about the SAS and how they recruited when that first started in World War II. And a lot of the guys that they'd pull for that, because at the time they thought it was a for sure doomed to fail type of unit.
Suicide mission kind of thing.
For sure.
Yeah.
So they would pull guys from prisons that were military prisons that were in there for fighting or for arguing with anybody that would fight with their leadership typically would be considered a good fit. And those guys usually ended up being the best for those types of operations.
And they're great. Listen, they may not be the best for truck drivers or for mechanics or for logistics folks or cooks or whatever. Mm-hmm. But for infantry guys, and especially paratroopers, those are the dudes you want. Mm-hmm. And I had kids that probably should have, I won't say I protected them, and I won't say that I hid anything that they did wrong. However, I took a lot of things in context. Like, is this really that bad? Mm-hmm. You know, as a guy who grew up, and I'd never hidden any of this, but I grew up as a teenager who drank. Mm-hmm. You know, I partied my ass off. And I certainly wasn't going to be the hypocrite that walked through the barracks and was like, you know, if you're not 21, you know, well, you know. Now what I would do, and I used to, you know, where I lived was on the north side of the base, and most of Fayetteville was on the south side of the base. So on a Saturday night, if I went to dinner or went out or whatever, on my way back, I would drive through Fort Bragg instead of around it, and I would stop at the barracks, right? Friday night, Saturday night at midnight, 1 a.m., you'd find some shit going on in the barracks, right? So I'd pull in and I'd walk in there, and, you know, I saw a lot of crazy stuff. I saw one of my kids chasing a girl in her underwear down the hallway. Come on, you know? But I would walk down and I would walk into a room, a barracks room. There'd be 6 kids sitting in there. Beer bottles, right? Or beer cans or whatever. And I'd be like, you know, the door's wide open. Like, you're 21. You're 21. You 4 are not 21. Don't be a fucking idiot. Close the door. You know, I didn't tell them not to drink because I wasn't in it. I wasn't, you know, who am I kidding?
Naive, right?
Right? But be smart enough to keep yourselves out of trouble. You know, those kinds of things.
You took care of them.
Yeah, right? Protected them a little bit from themselves for the most part, right? Of their own stupidity. But those were the kids that I wanted. And they were fantastic. I mean, you know, it was, and we were just training to train at that point. And I shouldn't say that because the 82nd, you know, even back then, it was the 911 contingency force for the president. We were training to be, you know, to blow out in 18 hours. Like we would be on recall for weeks at a time where you couldn't drink. You know, you had to stay sober all the time. And it was like, you know, we'd be on 2-hour recall. And when you got that phone call, it was like you had to be at work in uniform with your shit packed in 2 hours. And with the end state being 16 hours after that, you were rigged up in a parachute and a plane was taken off to go anywhere in the world. Like that was the life that we lived. So I always kind of looked at it as like, if that's the life we're asking these kids to live, we need to give them a little bit of leeway, right? Let's not be absurd about this. You know, and I had a boss who the guy that I didn't like changed out into a guy that I ended up loving. You know, there's a picture up here on my wall. There's 6 guys standing there, and those are the 6 guys that I went to Afghanistan with. But that boss, retired Brigadier General Marty Schweitzer, was a godsend to all of us. He was, you know, he's the son of a general officer, was an absolute rough and tumble, break shit and we'll figure it out later kind of guy who didn't take shit from anybody. And he loved paratroopers. And so he took over in June of 2001. And, you know, my company with our reputation and who we were and the culture that we were building, me and my leadership, you know, we used to do things that even back then were kind of taboo, but it was normal for us. When somebody got promoted or they got an award or something like that, they used to get what we call the Bravo Company hug, which was they got tackled and they got pink-bellied by the whole company, like 150 guys, right? 130 guys. So you get promoted from E2 to E3 or E3 to E4, you know, once the rank's pinned on, like you get a hug from the company. And so the previous commander, the guy that I didn't like my unit, particularly. And so, you know, we get this new guy in, Schweitzer, and he had a reputation. People knew of him. And it was a good reputation. And we had heard that he was that guy. And so my first sergeant decided we were going to test the waters on day 1. And so we go through the big ceremony, battalion change of command, old battalion commander leaves, Lieutenant Colonel Marty Schweitzer takes over. And at the end of the day, we're having our final formation and I'm standing in the back. First sergeant's out there and he's talking to the boys. And here comes Lieutenant Colonel Schweitzer. And he's just wandering around. and he sees Bravo Company in formation, and he walks up. All the way, sir. I salute him. He salutes back, and he goes, how you doing, Clay? I'm good, sir. He goes, so this is Bravo Company. I said, yes, sir, it is. And I looked at my first sergeant, and he goes, and he had this kind of country-ish drawl. And he calls the company to attention. Company, attention, about face. So everybody turns around, and they're looking at Lieutenant Colonel Schweitzer. And he goes, Bravo Company, that is our new battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Schweitzer. Get him, boys. And 130 of my paratroopers rushing, right? And Schweitzer is like, he's a college athlete. He played basketball at Old Dominion. And he backs up, and like the first guy that got to him got thrown, right? Battalion commander grabs this kid and he chucks him. And then he gets hit by the wave. And the boys jump on him and they pink belly the shit out of him. And I'm standing there and I'm like, well, I'm either getting fired or like this is going to be the coolest thing ever. And so the boys get done, and like the boss is in like starched uniform, the whole 9 yards, and he's all fucked up, right? T-shirt untucked. And he gets up, and the boys fall back in formation, and he looks at me, and I looked at him, and I'm like, oh fuck, here it comes. And he's like, is that normal? I said, sir, we do that shit all the time. He goes, that was fucking awesome. He goes, this is great. And I was like, well, sir, Bravo Company's happy to have you. And he goes, oh yeah, this is awesome. I like this company. And you know, and he turns around, and he walks away, and I'm like, holy shit. And that relationship continued to build. And then, you know, 9/11 happened.
So picking up where we were just leaving off, you were talking about 9/11 and when that happened. Where were you at for that? Well, how old were you?
So I was, what was that? I was 28. I was a rifle company commander, Bravo Company 3505 PIR, that's Parachute Infantry Regiment, in the 82nd Airborne Division.
Still in Kansas, right?
No, Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
North Carolina, got it.
Yeah. So rifle company commander, and you know, it was a normal morning. Everybody's got their 9/11 story. And so I'm in command of a company of 130 paratroopers, and we are on recall status. Like we are on, you know, go anywhere in the world and kill people kind of recall. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I got done doing PT, and I'm standing in my office in sweaty PT shirt and shorts, and my operations sergeant comes walking in. He goes, hey, sir, did you see that shit? Somebody just ran a plane into the World Trade Center. So in my head, I'm thinking a Cessna, right? Nobody was thinking a fucking airliner. I'm like, what? He goes, yeah, they just crashed a plane into the World Trade Center. They. That's what he said, they. I'm like, what are you talking about? So I go to the day room, which the day room is kind of a common room within the barracks, right? There's a big TV in there, couches and shit for, you know, the boys who can't afford their own TV or whatever. So we go in there and the news is on. And, you know, we see the earliest film footage of the smoke coming out of the tower and all that stuff. And I'm standing there and I'm like, and then we got the first looks of, you know, the plane. And I'm like, that's not good. So I went back to my office and it was like, what the fuck is going on? And then he came, my ops sergeant. Hey, listen, when you're in the Army and you've got a last name like Pupilo, you get a nickname like Poopy. It's just the way it is. So Sergeant Pupilo, a.k.a. Poopy, came walking in my office. And he goes, sir, they did it again. Again, he said they. I was like, what do you mean they did it again? He goes, they hit the other tower. I was like, no, it's got to be a different angle or a different film clip. He goes, no, the other tower. They hit the other tower. I ran down to the day room. And there it was. And I'm like, this is bad. I didn't know what, but I knew it was bad. And so my first sergeant, my senior enlisted guy in my company, was actually supposed to be having surgery on his feet that day. So he's at the hospital, right? And I'm expecting him to be gone for, a couple of weeks. And I'm watching this happen, and I'm like, this is not good. So I grab my leadership, the NCOs and the officers who are around. Because again, PT just got done. So some people are left to go shower. Some people are like, everybody's a little bit in the wind at the time. And I was like, so I looked at my acting first sergeant. So this is an NCO who's standing in for my senior enlisted guy. And I said, all right, Sergeant Mack, here's what we're going to do. I said, the guys that live off post have 1 hour. Go home, get what you need, come back. I don't know what this is. I don't know what the fuck's going on, but it's not good. I said, and we're not going to be sitting around waiting to find out. I said, send them home. They got an hour. Be back in an hour. And I said, and the guys who live in the barracks, have them start drawing weapons out of the arms room. And he goes, sir, you think we need weapons? I said, I don't know, but we're not going to fucking wait. Like, let's do something. Again, going back to the Ranger School decisiveness. Like, I don't know what this is, but I know there's things that I can do to be prepared. I said, let's start drawing weapons. Roger that, sir. So he pulls, the NCOs together. They flush out all the guys. They tell the guys, run home, run back. Right? All the kids who live in the barracks after they, and I told them, I said, I don't give a shit if guys stay in their PT uniform all day. I said, we'll figure that out. I said, but, so he's got guys, sent to armor. The armor's opening up the arms room, and we're starting to draw weapons. And so Sergeant Poopy's giving me kind of updates, right? We find out about the Pentagon, and and so all of that stuff is happening, and guys are coming back. We're getting accountability, and we got a hold of everybody. In walks my first sergeant, who was supposed to be having surgery. I look at him like, "The fuck are you doing here?" He goes, "Are you kidding me, sir?" He goes, "I was laying on the gurney. They started my anesthetic, or they started my anesthesia, and I saw that shit on the TV." I pulled that IV out and I put my shoes on and I left. And he did. Literally. Ripped the IV out of his arm. Basically told the hospital to kiss his ass. Put his shit on, and he left and he came to work. And so he goes, "What are we doing?" So I kind of gave him an update. And not long after that, my battalion commander, Marty Schweitzer, we got the phone call. Hey, the battalion commander wants to see all the company commanders in his office. Well, the way our barracks were laid out was Charlie Company was the furthest out, right? So the Charlie Company commander grabbed the headquarters commander. They grab the Delta commander. They come to my office and grab me. We go to Alpha Company, and then we all go to the battalion headquarters together. Anytime we got called for a meeting, it was all kind of the same thing. So they come grab me, and we go up to the battalion commander's office. And he is, and I still don't know who it was to this day, he is ripping somebody's ass on the phone, right? And I'm like the first guy walking through the door. So I'm in that we always talk about the fatal funnel when you're clearing rooms, right? You don't want to get stuck in the doorway. Either be out of the room or be in the room. And like I'm walking and I'm getting to that doorway and he is ripping somebody's ass. And I like pause. I'm like right in the door frame. And he's like waved us in. So we kind of walk in and we all sit down. And he's motherfucking somebody and fuck, this is bullshit and blah, 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 blah. And, he's yelling. We're all like looking at each other and we're like, and he goes, "And God damn it, sir." Whoever he was yelling at outranked him and he didn't give a shit. "God damn it, sir, if I need any more fucking help from you, I'll call you." And he hung up the phone. And we were like, holy shit. So, and then he turns to us, he's like, "All right, what's going on?" He like flipped the switch, like totally cool. We're like, "All right, what is going on?" So he said, "Listen, we don't know what's going on." is really what he said. That was a short version of the discussion is we don't know what's going on. Nobody knows what's going on. And like I said, we were on 2-hour recall. We were on recall to be able to deploy anywhere in the world. And he said, listen, we're not going anywhere. As much as you guys all really want, like this is what we've been waiting for, right? This is what we've been training for, is to be able to blow out of here and go kill some motherfuckers. It's not happening today, And he goes, but we have some responsibility. We have been tasked by the division headquarters in light of what's going on. We're like, okay, sir. And he goes, the S3 will get to you, but, he'll get you the plan. They're doing some mission analysis right now, but the bottom line is that they're going to lock down Fort Bragg, and they're going to use us to do it. Made sense, right? We didn't know what the threat was. Nobody knew what the threat was. So lock it down. And you're talking about Fort Bragg, which has some pretty interesting stuff on it, to include the headquarters for Delta Force, right? That's where Delta Force resides, is Fort Bragg. So if you're going to lock down a base, like that's a base that probably needs to be locked down. So he's like, the S3 will get to you guys and he'll tell you who it is and when and how long you're staying and blah, 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 blah. And I said, hey, sir, look, Bravo, we'll go first. And he goes, well, the S3 will get a plan. I said, sir, I've already drawn weapons. And he looked at me and goes, you did what? I said, fuck, sir, we didn't know. We don't know what's going on. It's probably about noon at this point, maybe 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So we didn't know. I said, why would we wait? If we're going to blow out of here, the biggest pain in the ass is drawing weapons. So we got him out of the arms room. He's like, all right, I'll let the S3 know. Bravo companies, you guys are staying first. You got first crack. Okay, sir. So we walked out, and my buddies are like, man, I can't believe you said that. Like, I can't believe you told him. Like, you knew you were volunteering. I was like, yeah, I knew we were volunteering. They were just giving me a hard time. But so I didn't go home for 3 days because we were securing Fort Bragg. And so, my buddies, like the other companies, they told everybody, hey, go home at the end of the day. And because the base was locked down, and it was locked down for the first time, traffic patterns were a disaster, like all of that stuff. And like my buddies couldn't get back to work the next day. They just couldn't even get, like the lines were so long to get into the base that they couldn't even get on. Like it took that long. So I was there for 3 days securing Fort Bragg. But that was for us, that was the beginning of the War on Terror. And it was, it hit close to home because we were on recall, because we knew there was a potential for us to blow out of there that day. Obviously, it turned out not to be so. But, in the coming months, we watched very intently all of the small things that were happening. And we were getting intel briefings and intel updates, right? We knew that special operations were going in. We didn't know in what capacity or what size or a lot of mission-specific details, but we knew when things were happening. I'm not going to lie when I say we were disappointed to find out that the Army had decided to send the Marines and the 101st to Afghanistan before us. We weren't happy about that. And we weren't happy because, we consider ourselves to be the pinnacle of conventional forces in the Army. And so, people have asked me, and when I say people, I'm talking about close family members, going back to those days, like, why did you want to go? And the best explanation I can give anybody is, imagine being a professional athlete at the height of your abilities, like the peak of your career, but you've never played a real game. You've practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced, but you've never played in a real game. All you would want to do is play in a real game. That was us. That was who we were. We had a couple of guys, like in my rifle company of 130, 35 guys at the time, I had 3 combat vets. 3. That was it. I had one sergeant who had jumped into Panama in '89 with the Rangers. I had one platoon sergeant who had been with the 101st in Desert Storm and that big swooping air assault from the west. And then I had an NCO who was with 10th Mountain in Mogadishu in 93. That was it. So nobody, I had a couple guys that had been to the Balkans, but that wasn't the same thing. Like I'm talking about like no bullshitting around, like big war stuff. Combat. So, we all had that desire to go, to try, to be, to do. We signed up for it, right? Nobody's looking for a fight, but goddamn, like that's your job. So when the 101st and the Marines went, we were not happy. But we found out, the rumors started swirling in March of 2002 that we were going to go and replace the 101st. And so we put together some training that truthfully was pretty innovative at the time. Like we knew everything the 101st was sending back, or everything we were hearing. We were reading on our own. We were reading, Les Grauman, Bear Went Over the Mountain. We were reading, we're doing research, all that stuff. We're trying to educate ourselves as best we could. But what we were paying attention to was the tactics, mostly. So we knew the 101st was doing a lot of cave clearing. We're on Fort Bragg, North Carolina. There's no caves to clear. So, like me and the Alpha Company commander, one of my peers, we decided, we had all these trenches that we used to train on, how to clear a trench, right? It was a task that we regularly trained on. We were like, well, let's put some roof over the trench, turn it into a cave, figure out how to transition from daytime into a blacked out cave where you got to turn your nods on and you got to, and so we did some of that. Again, just like we're grasping at straws, we're trying to figure out, prepare as best we can. But the one thing we kept doing was we kept doing PT and we kept shooting. Because we knew that those were two things that you just can't do enough of. So when in doubt, that was it. And so, we kept prepping and prepping and prepping, and then we finally did get told in April that we were going. And so 101st is there. The 82nd gets told, send a brigade to Afghanistan to relieve the 101st in June. Now, General Vines, John Vines, was the 82nd commander at the time. John Vines was a former 82nd guy, but he was also a Ranger guy, special operations guy, that kind of guy. He had a nickname. Used to call him the Viper. He was a warfighter, and he had a great relationship with with my boss's boss, our brigade commander, the colonel. 505th Parachute Infantry is known as the Panthers, and all of our call signs had Panther in them. So Panther 6, our big boss, colonel at the time, Jim Huggins, who retired as a 3-star general. General Vines told Colonel Huggins, you guys are going to Afghanistan. And Huggins said, and they had known each other for years. Huggins said, okay, sir. And he goes, you're going to take the brigade with, but we got to make some modifications. One of your battalions has got to stay home. And you got to take one of the battalions from the other brigade, from 1st Brigade, from the 504. And he goes, and they'll tell you which battalion they're going to give you. And he goes, okay. He goes, you just got to figure out who you're leaving behind. But who you're not leaving behind, and the 1st battalion that's going to Afghanistan is Marty Schweitzer in 3505. So we got hand selected by the division commander to go, to be the first ones from the division to go. And there's a lot of reasons we got picked. General Vines had seen us do a lot of things. He'd been to a lot of our training. He knew, the warfighter mentality of our boss, of our organization, of the whole unit. But one of the things that he loved about us the most was, under the most stressful training conditions that they could replicate on Fort Bragg, we always kept a sense of humor. And I say that we would do an airborne operation in training, 1,000 guys jumping at night, right? It gets pretty pretty adventurous when you start doing stuff like that, right? So we would jump and we would do a training exercise once we hit the ground, replicate combat and all that. And General Vines often would jump with us. And then he would go to his Humvee and he would turn on the radio and he would listen to our communications. And he never got involved. He never interfered. He just wanted to listen and, hear what was going on. So he would listen to our communications, and our radio net, our battalion radio net was, it was controlled chaos with a lot of laughs. We would give each other shit. We would talk shit to each other on the radio, like during an operation. Never interfere with anything, always very efficient, but it was always, no matter what, everybody, kept things light. And it was like this camaraderie that you just couldn't replicate. And that, truthfully, is what General Vines loved most about us. Of all the other things, the war-fighting ability, the mentality, and everything else, but that culture of the camaraderie and how tight we were is the reason that he picked us to go. And so things were handled a little bit differently back then. In my all of my deployments, you would rotate whole units in at one time, right? It was just big moving blocks. Well, back then, they sent 3505 to Afghanistan, and the 101st sent one battalion back. And then we stayed there for a month, and we worked for the 101st. And then after we were there for a month, our brigade headquarters came in, and they replaced the 101st headquarters, and they brought a battalion with them. And then a month later, they replaced the 3rd battalion. So it was a very echeloned, very methodical. It wasn't rushed, which again, through the wars, as Iraq started and Afghanistan picked up and everything, we didn't have that luxury. It was very much like a plug, just get guys in and out. It was very methodical. Anyway, so we go to Afghanistan. I stepped foot June 24, 2002. I stepped foot in Afghanistan.
How was your mindset going into that? I know that obviously you're training for it, so you're prepared, but you have any nerves going in there?
Of course.
Obviously.
So Charlie Company Commander, who's my best friend in the Army, is a guy named Keith Pruitt, and he was a prior enlisted 82nd guy for Desert Storm. Did 4 years and then went to college and came back in as an officer. And so I'm Bravo Company, he's Charlie Company. And, he was one of those guys that had combat experience. But he was my only peer that had combat experience. And he told us, he's a very grounded guy, boisterous and fun, and East Texas as he is. He's a very grounded guy. And he told all of us before he left, he goes, listen, man, in his East Texas accent, he goes, this shit's all fun and games and training, but the first time you're flying in on that helo, and those doors open and you're stepping foot into fucking bad guy territory, he said, your asshole's going to pucker. He goes, and you're going to figure out that it's real. And he wasn't talking down to us. He was just relaying, like, listen, it's going to feel different. And he was right. And so, we flew to Germany, and then we flew, and this didn't last long because we ended up using so many contracted flights. We flew a C-17 Air Force aircraft from Germany. We did an in-flight refuel over the Black Sea, and then we flew straight into Kandahar. And so they used to do this thing back then, because when the Mujahideen in Afghanistan was fighting against the Soviets, we gave them a bunch of Stinger missiles to shoot down helicopters with. We didn't have accountability for all those, and we didn't know if there were any left or not. So when they got over Kandahar, at however many tens of thousands of feet, they would get over the airfield and they would start this spiral descent, so that if anything happened, we were over the airfield, right? And they could, divert to an emergency landing instead of taking a long, slow descented approach. They would spiral in. So, it seemed like forever. We're on this hard bank spiral descent. And finally we land, and we don't know what we're getting into. Like, we don't know what it's like when we get off the plane. And I won't say it was anticlimactic, but it was a little bit anticlimactic. So I get off the plane, and like the guy, we had sent some guys over early, our advanced party, handful of guys, and I knew flying in, I was like, I know it's not bad because we don't have any ammo. If it was bad going in, they would have given us bullets, right? So we do this big spiral all the way in, and we land, and the ramp comes down on the C-17, and, there's our advanced party guys, and they're like, hey, welcome to Afghanistan, come on, come this way. And we walk through a admin processing building, and they scanned all of our ID cards to track us coming in, and then they took us over and they put us in these tents, and I'm like, okay, well, that's not what I expected. But I didn't know what to expect. Like, I'd built it up in my head that it was something different than that. I didn't know what, but it certainly wasn't that,
Did you talk to any of the 101st guys when they got back?
We talked to some of the 101st guys got sent to us before we ever left. And so they had fought in Operation Anaconda, which at the time was this, the battle in Shiakout Valley, where they thought they had bin Laden, and it turned into this massive multi-day firefight. A couple of, medals of honor came out of that.
Yeah. That was where the guy got the one on the mountain, right? That was all recorded.
Yeah. And so, they had fought through that, right? So we had talked to them before we even left. And so we kind of knew that, clearing caves, clearing houses, clearing buildings, but also long-range marksmanship, big wide open desert. We'd gotten hints and pieces, but nothing of the day-to-day life, right? Which was this weird anomaly that we just didn't know. My first sergeant had some foresight. He was the guy who had been in Somalia in '93. And when we were packing up our containers to get shipped over there, I'm standing there, ready to go, like we're going to war kind of thing. And guys are like, again, this is '02. My first sergeant packed up all of his tools, his battery-powered tools, saws and drills. I was like, first sergeant, what are you doing? He goes, sir, we're going to have to build some shit when we get over there. I don't know what, but whether it's, furniture or buildings or fucking whatever, we're going to have to build some shit. These tools are going to be important. I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. And then like a couple minutes later, I literally see guys like toting a big screen, flat screen out to the Connex. And I'm like, get that shit out of here. And he goes, no, sir. He goes, we're going to have a lot of downtime. He goes, that, video games, DVD players, like that shit's important because we got to keep these guys occupied because if they get bored, that's when we start having problems. And I'm like, okay, all right, I'll buy that. So we did. We took that kind of stuff with us. But we get to these tents and we get settled and it was like, okay, well, what the hell are we doing? And so it took a couple of days. You had to get acclimated to the altitude. Kandahar's at like 7,000 feet. It's June.
Hot, yeah.
Like you couldn't even go outside in the daytime. It was so friggin' hot. And so we were slowly learning things about how our life was going to be. One of our companies, our Alpha company, immediately got deployed. A drone, one of the big drones, crashed on a mountainside in Pakistan. And so our Alpha company immediately got sent there to babysit this drone wreckage until they could come recover the black boxes and all that other crap. Our Delta company, which is like a Humvee vehicle-mounted company, was the only one we had. They immediately started doing patrols outside of the base of Kandahar, right? Charlie company got put on all the guard towers in Kandahar, right? So here's Bravo company.
Sorry.
Here's Bravo company, and we got nothing to fucking do. Like everybody else has been given a job. And I started to at first I was like, did we do something wrong? Like, why are we being put on the fucking bench? And what I didn't know, and it became very clear very quickly, was that one company was there to do two things. One, there were some special operations and some CIA folks in Kandahar City that if they got in a bind, somebody had to be there to go pull them out of a bind. But also, there was a special operations headquarters on Kandahar Airfield with SEALs and some coalition special operations folks. And they always needed infantry to go with them on operations. So I went to my boss and I said, hey, sir, what's going on? Why is Bravo? He's like, I got work for you to do. Just fucking relax.
So for the viewer, just so we get an understanding of
Yeah.
what you were living in, I guess, was this like already built up as like a fob type of thing? Or
So
is this...
Kandahar Airfield was still bearing a lot of scars from the initial invasion. And so when like the initial forces went into Kandahar Airfield, it was the Rangers, it was Delta, it was some other special operations folks, and they cleared some buildings, they killed some folks, they blew some holes and shit. Like they did what they do best. 101st came in behind them, along with, there was actually some Canadians there at the same time. And they tried to establish it slowly into a fob, like the first thing that we knew as a fob or a base camp. So they had all these old canvas tents and all this stuff that they were living in. Now, unfortunately for them, the Army, it took the Army a while to get their shit together. The Army had this prepackaged living system. Like containers come in, you open a container's got 2 tents, a generator to support 2 tents, 2 refrigerators, cots for 2 tents full of people. Like it was prepackaged, right? You open the container, you pull all the stuff out, you set up the 2 tents, you have power, right? And then you put another container, and then you open it up and you build 2 more tents. And then and so you can rapidly build a tent city. Well, the 101st didn't get any of that. When we got there, we were literally, the first day we were there, we were tearing down their old canvas tents and putting up this new tenting system. So yes, we lived in tents, but within 72 hours, we were in powered, climate controlled, we had cots in there, like all that stuff. So we had that. Our battalion headquarters was in the, and when we got done setting ours up, because Alpha Company was gone, right? They were in Pakistan guarding that down drone. We set their shit up, right? We helped Charlie Company set their stuff up. So it was everybody was pitching in. Our battalion headquarters was in the terminal building, right? So this old, Kandahar Airfield was a airport. It was a normal civilian airport, actually built by the Americans in the 50s or 60s. Anyway, so our battalion headquarters was in the terminal building. But there was a section of the base that was blocked off, and that's where the special operations folks were. Another section of the base is where the Canadians were living. Like there were all these pieces and parts, but it was still very, very small. Mm-hmm. There were also still, kind of remnants of the old Soviet occupation because the Soviets were there. I remember the first time I went jogging for PT. There's signs everywhere. They're like, do not deviate off of the trail. Anti-personnel mines, right? The Russians mined the shit out of that place. And so, like, you would be running along and on the other side of the fence, you could see all these old Russian anti-personnel mines, like just on the other side of the fencing. So we were kind of getting settled, but that's when my boss broke. He's like, I got work for you to do, but you're going to be doing special operations support. And then you got to be prepared to go rescue the CIA folks that are living in Kandahar City.
How far are you from the city?
It's literally like you're not far. Like the plan was always to fly, because if we were going to exfil them, it was going to be a fly in and fly them out kind of thing. But I had to go in. Actually, a couple of us went in and we did a ride along with them to a couple of sites in Kandahar City, which were pre-planned exfil locations. Some of them on the outskirt, a place where you could land 3 or 4 helicopters. One of them was the soccer stadium inside of Kandahar City. And, that, I remember walking in there. If you guys remember, there was this, after 9/11, and we were finding out that it was Al-Qaeda, and that we were finding out that they were being supported by the Taliban, and they had safe harbor in Afghanistan. And we were learning all these things, right? We were learning about Afghanistan and who these people were. there was this film footage that they showed from a soccer stadium where they had a little girl was hanging from the goalposts. And I don't know if you've ever seen that footage. That's Kandahar soccer stadium. Yep. So we walk up the outside steps, and when you walk up to the top, you're at the top of the bleachers and you're looking into the stadium. And again, I'm a lifelong soccer guy, right? So I get to the top and I look at this, dust soccer pitch with two sets of, two goals sitting there. And I look at it and I literally, I locked in on the goal posts, and I was like, holy shit, this is where they were executing those little girls. And it really hit me these are some really, really evil motherfuckers. Obviously 9/11 had its own, but when you're standing there and you see that shit up close, and then we walked down and walked in and we're standing on the field, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm locked in now. This is bullshit. Everything from 9/11 just welled back up again. I just got angry, and so so we had that to worry about. So my guys, we were packed and ready all the time. No matter what we were doing, body armor was laid out. Weapons were ready. All that shit was ready to go. But then we got a couple of opportunities to go do some special operations support, which was really freaking cool.
What was the first one you did?
So the first one I did was with the Canadians. And so it was, it was their high-end special operations, and they were going to do a capture mission. So we go and we do all the planning, we do all the rehearsals, and we do everything with them. And our job, it was me and one of my platoons, and then some help from the battalion. And I say help they gave us the surgeon, just in case, right? Take the doc with you. So we're doing all the rehearsals, and we were supposed to set up the outer cordon, right? Surround the target building complex, let the Canadians go in, snatch up the guy that they're looking for, right? Cover them, keep everybody out, don't let anybody escape, right? Which that mission set became business as usual for the next 20 years. That was so normal. But that was the first time we had done it. And so we're going through all the mission planning, and we have Task Force 160, Special Operations Aviation Regiment is flying. So we've got 2 Chinooks and a Black Hawk, and they tell us, okay, reconnaissance teams are on the ground. They've seen this and this and this. They were talking about the flight path. And they're like, okay, we're going to leave Kandahar and we're going to fly through this very narrow mountain range. We're going to test fire all the gun systems on the helicopters, shoot into the sides of the mountains, and then we'll fly the rest of the way to the objective. Okay. And here, we're going to make this right-hand turn, and that's going to be our final approach, into the objective area, LZ. But right there at this right turn, there's this old Soviet anti-aircraft system. We don't know if it's still functional or not. Now, this is a quad barrel 23 millimeter
A Dishka?
ZSU 23-4, right? 4 23 millimeter guns, right, on a platform on a swivel designed to shoot down aircraft. And I'm like, we don't know if it's functional. Can the recon teams go look at it? And they're like, they can't. It's kind of out in the open. There's no way that they can. Okay. So, all right. And so this is my first time flying with the Special Operations Aviation guys. And they're as good as everybody tells you they are. I mean, they're the guys who just did, flew the Maduro raid into Venezuela. These guys are the best.
The SOAR guys,
yeah,
right?
Special Operations Aviation SOAR, 160th SOAR. They're the best helo pilots in the world. So professional and so willing to teach, all that stuff. They're just great. And so we're on the tarmac, and I walk up to our helo, and I walk up to I'm used to flying with conventional Army, right? They get a little restrictive about flying in helicopters with guns and live bullets and all kinds of shit. So I walk up to this guy who's a sergeant first class, and I was like, "Hey, Sergeant, what's the I'm Captain Novak. These are my bunch of hooligans riding on your helicopters tonight. What's the rules on the helo for, barrels up, barrels down, round in the chamber, no round in the chamber? And he looked at me and he goes, "Sir, just don't shoot any fucking holes in my helicopter." And I was like, "Okay, all right, I got it. Don't shoot any holes in the helicopter." And he kind of laughed at me, I was like, "All right, I got it." So I went back and, told the NCOs, I'm like, "Hey, let's just go round in the chamber, everything on safe, barrels down, and everybody's okay." They're like, "All right, sir." So we load up, and there's this colonel. And I see him hanging around the briefings. I don't really know who he is or what his job is, but he's a full bird colonel. And he's standing there, and he's in full kit, and we load up in the helicopters. And so on the ramp of a Chinook's the big dual rotor helicopter, right? So on the ramp, they've got a machine gun, right? Because it's Task Force 160, they don't have belt-fed machine guns out the port and starboard. They got miniguns, right? Electrically fired miniguns. So we all get loaded in. The colonel comes in. He sits on the very last seat. Ramp goes up. We take off. Ramp goes partially down. Crew chief goes out. He plops his ass behind the 240 that's sitting on the ramp. And the colonel goes out and he sits down next to him. Now, this is a colonel, and he's holding an M249 SAW, which is a 5.56 belt-fed machine gun. This is a colonel, right? And I'm like, who is this guy? So we take off. It's dark, right? And, I know that we've got to fly through this pass. They're going to test fire all the guns. And so, I'm watching my watch, and I know about when it is. And, so they test fire the guns, and I've got my night vision on, and I'm watching this. I'm watching the gun off the ramp because I'm facing the rear of the aircraft. And the colonel goes to test fire his SAW, and it goes bang, and it jams. And he, charges it, bang, and it jams again. And I'm like, oh, fuck. So this guy gets up. Now we're we're flying in a helicopter, and the ramp is open. This guy gets up, walks just to the edge of where the ramp meets the body of the aircraft. So he's still technically kind of outside. Takes the machine gun apart, puts it back together, sits back down on the ramp, charges it, loads it and charges it, test fires it, and it works fine. And he did all of this under nods, night vision, in a moving helicopter. And I'm like, who the fuck is this guy, right? So we're flying, and we're however long it was, about 30 minutes, and we get that time signal that we're about to make this right-hand bank over this old Soviet, anti-aircraft piece, and I'm thinking to myself, well, it's either going to go really, really well, or we're all going to fucking die, And we're flying in these big, CH-47s, and it's not a small target. And so just as we bank, I hear the right minigun start firing. And I'm like, fuck. Like, he's shooting. And I'm like, okay. And I'm waiting. And then we level out, and we just keep flying. And I'm like, and I watched the CH-47 behind us, and their minigun did not fire, right? So I'm like, that was really weird. So we fly in, we hit the ground, talk about baptism by fire. The ramp goes down, and me and the platoon sergeant, first one's off the ramp, right? That's what leaders do, especially paratroopers. Well, we hit this muddy ass field, and the two of us, like, first boot hits and sinks, second boot hits and sinks, and the two of us just go face first into the fucking mud. This is Captain Novak's introduction to combat, as I fall flat on my face into the mud, and like all the boys come off the helicopter behind me, and I'm laughing at myself. I'm like, you gotta be shitting me. So we get ourselves up, and we go, and we take up our positions, and the Canadians do what they've got to do, and they go, They're going and they're doing their work. And so we've got a C-130, AC-130 Spectre gunship over the top of us. And as awesome as those things are, with all the weapon systems and all the killing that they can do, the best thing about that aircraft is it has an IR spotlight. So they radio down to us and they're like, hey, there's a guy hiding in the bushes outside of your cordon. We're going to light him up with the spotlight. And we're like, okay. Boom, right? So it's an infrared spotlight. We can all see it through our nods, and it's like daytime. Mm-hmm. And there's this guy sitting behind a bush, and he thinks that he is completely concealed. He has no idea that under night vision, he looks like Las Vegas, right? So like two of my guys get up, and they just walk over there, and they grab him, and he was like, what? Hey! He had no idea how we could see him, right? So we bring him back, and, you know, took him prisoner. And then the helos come back in, right? Operation goes, they snatch up the guy. We load everybody up on the helos and we fly back.
Did they come in on a different helicopters, the Apaches or whatever?
No. So that the same aircraft, they kept a Black Hawk on station because they had a sniper team in the Black Hawk, right? That were kind of circling overhead. But the two CH-47s came back and picked us back up. The two Chinooks did.
Did the Canadians come in with the...
They came in on the Black Hawk.
Got it.
So we came in on the 247s. They came in on the Black Hawk. And after the Black Hawk dropped them off, he stayed on station and provided overwatch with the sniper team.
Did they hit that target? Was it relatively quiet when they...
It was very quiet. And they, I think, if I remember correctly... got the high value target, no shots fired.
Wow.
So I think they rolled in on him when he was asleep.
Awesome.
And they just balled him up. Yeah. Which is amazing considering we rolled in there with two helicopters and it didn't fucking wake anybody up.
Right.
But so we fly back to Kandahar and, you know, everything's good. You know, we go back, we clean gear. Later that day, we go for, you know, an after action review, kind of go over what happened with the, you know, with the operation. And so I see this colonel. I'm like, hey, sir. It's like, what's your deal? And he looks and he goes, what? I was like, what's your deal? Like, you're a colonel. You're flying with these guys. You're clearly not a pilot. You're riding around with a saw. Like, what's your deal? He's like, oh, I'm a surgeon. It's like, you're a surgeon? He goes, well, I was a 18 Delta Special Forces medic enlisted guy long time ago. And I went to medical school. I became a doctor. I joined the reserves, and when all this kicked off, I just volunteered to, you know, do a deployment and come over here. So he was a prior enlisted Special Forces guy, medic. So the comfort with the weapon systems and all that other stuff, but he was a surgeon. Hilarious. But then you know, we're in the AAR and we're talking about the operation. I'm like, hey, what was with the right minigun? Like, that was not planned. We were never told that was going to happen. So it turns out, while I was watching the surgeon fuck around with his machine gun, the right minigun didn't fire. It had a not electrical failure, it had a mechanical failure. Well, they carry a spare. So the guy on that door unhooks the machine gun, right? Takes the chain gun out, the Gatling gun, pulls it out, puts it in the rack, takes the spare, puts the spare in, hooks up all the electrical, hooks up the ammo, feeds it, and by that time, we're out of that valley.
Holy shit.
So, but he did all that in the dark under nods. Again, very impressive. So what he did was, on his headset, he asked the air crew, he's like, hey, I haven't test fired this thing. Is there any place, anytime, any way I can test fire it? And so they got clearance when they made that right bank, because he was on that side of the aircraft, that he hit that ZSU 23-4 just because. Mm-hmm. And it turned out it was completely rusted. It was like non-functional and all that other shit. But, you know, that was one of those, I was like, okay, I get it. It would have been nice for the rest of us in the aircraft to know those things. You know what I mean? Yeah, so that was my first one. But we did a couple more. We had one that we were supposed to do with the SEALs that ended up not happening for whatever reason. But that was kind of our job for the first month that we were there.
How long after you got there did you see your first firefight?
We started doing combat operations as a battalion in August.
So a couple months.
Yeah. So the first time I got shot at was actually rockets. And we did this, our battalion did this 7-day, 5 objective. Yeah, we hit 5 objectives and did 3 air assaults in 7 days. Like we left Kandahar on helicopters, hit a target, walked, hit a target, flew, hit a target, flew again, went into Shaikat Valley where Anaconda happened. Like we did all of that in 7 days. The third objective was this old Soviet airfield. And we wanted to test to see if it was viable for another US base in the future. Was the runway still usable? There were still buildings there and everything else, but you could see the airstrip. So we flew in and did an daytime airfield seizure as a battalion, and cleared the buildings and all that other stuff. Well, the first night we were there, we got rocketed, and so that was the first time I was shot at. And it was 3, and it was interestingly enough. So it was 3 107 rockets, and they were aimed. So you got the whole battalion is out there. Alpha Charlie, Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, we're all out there. And the 3 rockets were aimed. We just happened to be the guys in the spot, but they were aimed at Bravo Company sector. And we had 2 land short, but then we had 1 land inside the perimeter. It was, we paced it off the next morning, and it was like, I think it was like 62 meters from where I was at, my hole. So we had 2 land short, and then we had 1 that landed in. No casualties, but we responded with a shit ton of mortar fire. Like they sent us 3, we probably sent, about 180 in return.
Yeah.
And
your rules of engagement there were what?
Tighter than people realize, truthfully. We were very much in the fire when fired upon. Everybody over there carries a gun.
Yeah, it's like part of their country's standard.
And so we weren't trying to interfere with that. Now, what we were doing when we went and cleared a place, any building, any village, whatever, our rules with them were bring out all the weapons. We will let you keep AK-47 and below, right? Anything, pistols, there was a bunch of old British 303 Enfields still floating around over there, any of that stuff. AK-47 and below, as long as you show it to us, we will let you keep it. Anything bigger than that, we are confiscating. Also, if we find something that you didn't show us and you were trying to hide, we're taking everything. Mm-hmm. And that was, that truthfully was very effective. So because everybody carried a gun, there were a lot of instances where we knew we were being observed. We knew that the people observing us were armed, but there really wasn't anything that we could do about it. I know I watched, we flew in on a helicopter mission one time, daytime air assault, and literally right on the Paki border. And I watched 2 guys, AK slung over their back, ran across the riverbed, the dry riverbed, into Pakistan, ran up the hill, sat on top of the hill, and they watched us the whole time. Mm-hmm. But never posed a threat, never pointed a gun. And I talked to guys, and again, that was my first of 3 deployments over there. And I've talked to tons of guys who are like, when we were there, we would have just shot those guys. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, well, when we were there in 2002, that was not how things were done. The rules of engagement were pretty tight. Mm-hmm. And I think for good reason. The Taliban had gotten beat up really, really good by the 101st and by the special operations and all those guys in the first 9 months of that fight. And so they were a little bit back and a little bit licking their wounds, and they were very cautious. But everybody carried a gun. You couldn't just shoot everybody with a gun. Yeah.
So what else? What happened next as far as things that stick out to you?
So we found, you talk about the remnants of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. We found a weapons cache that was, I think, still the biggest in recorded history of Afghanistan. So outside of Khost, which is in eastern Afghanistan, we were building up what turned out to be Fob Salerno. It turned into a huge base there. We were the first ones there. We built it. We put in the runway. We put in the fuel pods for the helipad. Like, we built that place. There were 2 British-built stone forts in Coast City. One of them was being occupied by what we called at the time the AMF, right? The AMF was Afghan military forces that preceded any kind of organized military they had. It was warlords with gangs with uniforms.
Right.
But they were friendly to Americans, so we worked with them. One of them was the AMF was operating out of. The other one was the biggest arms dealer in the region. So we got told, hey, look, this guy's got a lot of stuff. And we, again, like the whatever you want to call it, the Holy Grail, we were looking for stingers. Like, that was the thing we were most worried about, was stingers. So we figured if anybody had a stinger, it was probably the biggest arms dealer in the region, right? So my company, Bravo Company, got tasked to go over there one morning, and I had all 3 of my rifle platoons plus a platoon from another company. So now I'm rolling with like 170 guys. Our Delts company, the Humvee mounted company, they put in the cordon around the fort. And there was a special forces team that was with us, right? And so special forces team and a couple of civil affairs guys, they grabbed a megaphone. Now, this is a fort. And when I say a fort, I'm talking stone, 10-foot walls, firing ports, the whole 9 yards. Big, huge wood gate. And we know it's filled with weapons. And so the special forces team and the civil affairs guys grab a bullhorn, and they're trying to, come out. We're not going to hurt you. Come out, right? And I'm like, this is not working. I'm watching activity. You can see activity on some of the rooftop buildings, building rooftops inside of the fort. I'm like, this is not working. So I call back to Colonel Schweitzer, and I'm like, hey, sir, like this is, we're going to have to go in there. He's like, do it. All right, sir, Roger. So I look at one of my squad leaders, and I was like, get an 8-man stack on that gate. Roger, sir. So he goes and he gets his squad, and they're stacking on the gate. The special forces team leader, who was a captain, what the fuck are you doing? I was like, dude, this ain't working. They're not coming out. And he's like, well, we got to keep trying. And I was like, you see that? And so there's a tower that overlooks the gate, and there's a guy up in the tower, and he's got an RPK machine gun up there, and he's looking down on all of us. And I'm like, that guy is going to be a problem. I was like, we can sit here and beg and bargain and whatever, but that we can't deal with. Mm-hmm. He's like, no, we got it. And I was like, yeah, we're about to. Get out of the fucking way. And so he's starting to argue with me. And I was like, and I looked at my squad leader, and I was like, put the charges on the door. So he starts getting the breaching charges out, and he's putting them on this big, huge wood gate. And we're just going to blow it and roll in. And so the SF guy's like screaming at me. And, squad leader looks at me, and he gives me a thumbs up, and I get on the radio, and I call back to Schweitzer, and I'm like, hey, 3P6, that was his call sign, 3 Panther 6. I said, hey, 3P6 is Bravo 6. We're breaching in 30 seconds. And he was like, Roger. And that was it. That was, he didn't, you got it. And so we're on so in the airborne community, when you're jumping out of a plane, this is the sign for 30 seconds until you jump, right? So I look at the squad leader, and I give him the 30 seconds. And I looked at the SF guy, said, get your fucking guys out of the way because we're going in. And he's like, he's still screaming at me. And, you know, Schweitzer calls me. He's like, what are you waiting for? And I was like, 10 more seconds. And literally, we're getting ready to blow the breaching charge. And here comes 2 Apaches. And they dive in and they flew. They probably didn't clear that tower by 5 feet. Like they swooped in, never fired a shot. 2 Apaches just rolled in, and they rolled in on top of this fort, and they dropped down basically almost below their walls and then pulled back out again. And it caught me by surprise. I didn't know they were coming. And I was like, holy shit, you know, and they peel off. And by the time I looked back, all the Afghans are coming out, and they got their hands up, and they're like, you know, holy, like we can't fuck with helicopters, you know? So they came out. Now we spent the next 12 hours packing 35 5-ton trucks worth of munitions out of that place.
That's insane.
And the SF guys came back the next day with the Afghans and took even more out of it. But on top of that, inside of those walls was, I think it was 11 functional artillery pieces that could range where we were living across town.
Yeah, right.
So we went through, we thermited all of those. It's the only time in my Army career I got to do that. Take a thermite grenade, drop it down in there, and it burns the breech out of the artillery piece, right? Makes it completely unusable. We found in the basement of that place some nitroglycerin TNT dynamite that was so old that the EOD guys didn't even want to touch it. Like it's totally unstable.
Like napalm type?
Well, it was nitroglycerin, so it was old dynamite from like 100 years old. It had been sitting there forever. Yeah. They literally just dropped the building on top of it because they didn't want to try and go down and clean it up or diffuse it or anything.
Right.
So they just imploded a building on top of it. And then somebody threw a couple of hand grenades over the wall as we were on our way out of there. We had been loading trucks out and loading trucks out and loading trucks out. And so we're all in there and we're T-shirts and shorts. And somebody chucked a couple of Russian hand grenades over the wall. Thankfully, again, nobody happened to be standing close enough to get hurt. But like it was all a lot of chance contact, a lot of rockets. I got rocketed a bunch of times while I was over there the first time.
A lot of indirect stuff.
A lot of indirect stuff. But the thing that I always remember about that was that it was so Wild West when we were there. My RTO, my radio operator was a black guy, African-American guy. And we were going to places that had never seen Americans.
Yeah.
And the kids had never seen somebody with dark skin like that. So the little kids, you know, it wasn't like Iraq during the surge or later on. Like, you know, the kids were still, like we still viewed them as kids. The kids would come up and they would touch his hand because they thought it was dirty or they thought they'd never seen skin like that. So that little reminder of how just untouched it was when we were there it's just amazing. It's just amazing to me.
Right.
You know, and we spent a long time being relative. We were only over there for 6 months because Iraq hadn't even started yet, right? There was no drain on the Army. You know, we came home in December of 2002. Iraq didn't start until March of 2003. But there was so much freedom over there. Like I got sent out, my company. So our battalion did, I think it's like 14 battalion operations. Bravo company, my company was the lead company or the main effort company 11 out of the 14 times. So my boss kept giving us the tough jobs. And over and over and over again. And we loved it. Like we absolutely fucking loved it. We had to walk one night, that very first operation. We landed, we did an air assault, we cleared some buildings, and then we walked. So it's August. We walked 20 kilometers, which is just about 12 miles, at about 7,500 feet elevation, under combat load. into another operation the next morning, like no break. And we did it. And then that was the first night of this very long 7-day operation. So we get back to Kandahar after it's over with. And you remember I told you, like, my company walked everywhere when we were in training. We jump, we walk, everything we did, we walked. And the guys hated it, but they loved it. And when we got back to Kandahar, I had 2 specialists, 2 E4s that came up to me. I didn't ask, I didn't say anything, never nothing. These 2 kids walked up to me and they said, "Sir, now we get it." And I looked down and said, "What are you talking about?" It was like all that walking we did back on Fort Bragg, all that stuff that we did, the jump and the walk and the shoot and the walk and all the walking and all the rucking that we did. And as much as we hated it, now we understand why we did it. Because nobody else could have done that walk that we did that night. And we only did it because of all the walking we did before we got here. And like that was the greatest validation I ever got in my Army career, that like I was doing the hard right over the easy wrong and doing the right thing.
Right.
But I got sent out, on operations. Again, the infrastructure wasn't there back then. My boss sent me out on an operation, an overnighter, just Bravo company, nobody with us, and he handed me an Iridium satellite phone. He's like, "Hey, you've got, TACSAT, and you've got, the Air Force HF guys to talk to aircraft, and you can call for air support, and you can do all those things, and you're on your own. But, just call me on the phone and send up some reports." Literally, like, just go. Like, there was no hesitation. There was no oversight. There was no micromanaging. There was no like, "Hey, I can't send him out without sending, a major with him, or even, the colonel going with me." He just sent out Bravo company, just gave us some shit and told us to be on our way, go do your mission and come home. And that's what we did.
You think
you couldn't do that now?
Do you think that deployment prepared you for the combat that you saw at later deployments? Or was it a little bit?
100%.
It did, yeah.
Yeah.
Good. In what ways?
Understanding that you don't have to micromanage. That, I knew how good we were collectively, not just me, not just Bravo company, but 3505, that battalion as a whole. And that's the gold standard for every unit I've ever been in, because it's the best unit I've ever been in. And anybody you talk to that unit will always tell you that's the best unit they were ever in. But what I learned from that was the Army trains people, and good units train people to do their job. If you have trained them successfully, let them do their job. Yeah. Like, micromanaging, tons of oversight, tons of overwatch, reaching down into everything that people do is counterproductive. From that time on in my Army career, my leadership style always started with the same thing. I will trust you to do your job until you prove to me that you can't. Right. And unfortunately, during the global war on terror, that diminished. Things became so top heavy, and there was so much oversight, and there was so much micromanagement and controlling that happened, that those early days, you couldn't replicate that later.
Right.
And I feel very lucky to have been a part of that as early as it was, because I won't say it was a one-off, but it was pretty goddamn close.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you guys have any casualties that first deployment?
We did not, amazingly enough.
The whole battalion?
The whole battalion, actually. We had one guy, and this turns out to be a sad story. We had one guy who we thought, he was on a mounted patrol outside of Kandahar. We got a report back that there was contact, right? And they bring this guy in, and he took a grazing shot off of his Kevlar helmet. He's got traumatic brain injury. He's got, they're going to evac him, and they send him to Germany and give him a Purple Heart and the whole 9 yards. And the reality was he faked the whole thing. He was addicted to painkillers. And I don't want to talk ill will about the dead, because the guy's not alive anymore. But he was addicted to painkillers, and he either run out or was running out of what he had. And so he, made his helmet look like it had been shot. And the helmet itself, and then we had these covers, these, cloth covers that went over the helmet. And so one night on patrol, he steps out of his vehicle and fires, or, gets away from the vehicle far enough where nobody can really see him, fires off a couple of rounds, and then he tears his helmet. So it tears the cloth cover, and then underneath it looks like the Kevlar has been grazed by a bullet. They evac him, they send him to Germany, and they inspected his equipment. And somebody who had, I think, if I remember correctly, it was a reserve or National Guard doctor who happened to work forensic stuff for the FBI in her normal job, was like, a bullet didn't do this. And so his entire story unraveled. They were going to send Good Morning America to interview this guy. Like, this is crazy. Because he got shot in the head and survived, right? It was a big deal. And so he gets brought back from Germany. His story starts to unravel. Things start to go bad. And then, they found out that a lot of things within his career were fraudulent. He had, fraudulently, fabricated some graduation certificates from some schools and some other things. He eventually got, military discipline, got kicked out of the military, and then died of what I believe was a drug overdose.
Wow.
A few years later.
Sad.
But yeah, no casualties. Had some near misses. Had some guys, had some firefights and some, that kind of stuff. But nobody from our battalion.
Do you remember the first mutual engagement firefight that you guys were involved in? Were you there for that?
Yeah, the first one I was not there for. Our Delta company got into which is funny. So you got a column of Humvees with 50 cals and Mark 19s, and they're driving through, and they drive past this village, and somebody shot at them with an AK-47, and the Delta company just unleashed. And so it's these, Afghan adobe mud hut, kind of things. And it absorbed so much of the machine gun and grenades, right? Boom, they unleash hell. And then they call a ceasefire and they stop. And then all of a sudden it's like, pop, 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 pop. The guy shoots back at him with the AK-47. And so they lit him up again. They eventually killed him. But, and then one of my platoons got into a pretty good scrap one night. We all got separated. We all got sent on, late in the deployment, we all got sent on separate missions. And or separate locations. We were securing these Special Forces fire bases where the ODAs were operating out of, these Special Forces teams. And they were getting RPGs from Pakistan. They literally were sitting on the Pakistani border. And so these RPGs kept coming in. And my XO and a platoon were there. And so they started setting out ambushes at night and finally caught those guys. And they got into the fight. They got really, really low on ammo. So they waited. They moved back to the inside the walls, inside the fob itself. Wasn't even a fob, it was just a little fire base. Rearmed, right? Packed up more ammo. Waited till the sun came up and they went out there. And they're like, okay, we're, bodies and blood trails and all that stuff. That's what they went out there looking for. The entire place had been picked clean. And when I say picked clean, even their position where they were firing from, 2 belt-fed machine guns that they went through 1,600 rounds apiece, was all gone. The Afghans came and they took everything. All the brass, all the links.
Wow.
Everything was all gone. So there were some weird, those, early days, those weird things that happened. But
was it, you think that a lot of the resistance there was lighter because of the licking the wounds, like you said, and then also did it take longer for foreign fighters to get there to?
So we had some, we had reports, never saw any. We had some pretty significant repeated intel reports of Chechens. And again, never saw any, but there was always this recurring, like, hey, there's a small group of Chechens that are operating. And we even got reports that maybe some of the special operations guys had tangled with him, but we never saw him.
Right.
You know, I know that, again, they were kind of licking their wounds, but I also know that in the tail end of the deployment, you know, there's a fighting season over there. You know, as it gets cold, the Afghans kind of hunker down.
Yeah.
Especially when you get to altitude. Obviously it gets colder quicker, but you know, most of them are running around in sandals and thin clothing and those kinds of things. They don't like to fight in the wintertime at all, especially if there's snow on the ground. So as the temperatures start to drop, and especially at altitude, again, when you start to get some moisture and you start to get some snow on the ground, they back off. So for us, late October, really like mid to late October, especially at elevation, like activity died.
Right.
And that was something that we didn't know or understand because it was the first real winter of conventional forces. You know what I mean? Like, it just wasn't a thing that we were aware of. But they backed off and kind of went to ground, you know, to ride out the winter.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think we can probably wrap up there unless you have anything else you want to talk about your first deployment.
Listen, I can't say enough about that organization. And like I said, it's the gold standard that I compared to every unit I was ever in the Army. And I was in a lot of good units. That unit was exceptional.
Who did you deploy with in the other?
So my first deployment was with 3505. My second deployment was with the headquarters of 3rd Brigade 82nd, which is the 505th. I went back to my same unit. So I left there. I went to, I went to another duty station. I went to Leavenworth, Kansas. I went to Korea for a year. And then when I went back to Fort Bragg from Korea, I went back to the 505th. And I did a 3-month tour right after Korea. So I did Korea unaccompanied for a year, came home, and 45 days later I was in Iraq. I was back assigned to the 505th. I did 3 months in Iraq. With the 505th headquarters, and then we came home. I was home for a year. I went to Baghdad for a year, and I was with 2nd Battalion of the 505th. So I did with 3505 and then 2505. And then my 4th deployment, so I was in Baghdad for a year, came home. 7 months later, I went to Kabul. I was the aide-de-camp for Lieutenant General Rodriguez. He was the ISAF Joint Command commander, so he was running we were running the ground war in Afghanistan. And I did 13 months there. And then I was home for, I got home in July. I was home for about another year, and I went back to Afghanistan the last time on an advisory tour. I was a Cavalry Squadron Commander, but the Army was putting Afghan military advisor teams on the ground. And so they called us SFAT, Security Force Advise and Assist Teams. So I had an 18-man team, and I was back in Eastern Afghanistan again. And I was leading an advisory team that was advising the Afghan National Army.
Cool. Well, I'm sure we'll get into all those within the next couple of parts, but I just think it's interesting because so each deployment you pretty much had a different unit entirely. I mean, it was the same regiment, but I think that's interesting. So
and interestingly, you know, I got to see Afghanistan in 2002, and then my last one was 12-13.